It now being precisely 7 o'clock, we will call to order this meeting of the Concord Finance Committee of March 7th and start by advising everyone that we are being recorded and televised. Good evening. So we will launch right into our agenda. The first item is the approval of minutes. However, we are going to defer that until our next meeting. Our beloved scribe being missing and unable to take advantage of our comments. And if Mr. Banfield is so inclined, we could move right into the review of the
FY 20 guidelines. Okay, so in our original guideline meetings, we have some small disagreements, or at least items that need to be discussed vis-a-vis the town manager's budget. This is particularly relevant to the items that have been included, which draw down one-time funding to meet the budget. So we had a guideline budget. Finger on it? Yeah.
I could stop you and sort of inject something.
Yeah.
You all recall that I wrote on Monday to the town manager requesting additional information about use of, stabilization funds and the Muse Fund in particular. And the town manager wrote back to me this afternoon. A copy of his response is included in your packets.
Okay.
And I think it's worth, although it gets packed with detail, it's worth reading through in advance of the discussion we were just about to launch into.
Okay, so let's take a minute to review the town manager's response. So why don't we just take a minute to read it, because we're just getting it now. Well, the second page is really Tom's original question to the town manager, so you might want to read that first before.
It's a second.
Oh, a second. Before then reading the town manager's response.
It's the last statement.
So there seem to be more questions in the answer than there are answers to the question.
Yes, that was absolutely my sense, and I was interested that despite the fact that many more questions were raised,
Right.
the conclusion at the bottom was that this was the adoption of a novel approach to calculating the town
Right.
budget. I don't think we can yet conclude that.
I'm not sure that that's entirely follows from the previous paragraph. This is a novel approach.
We don't actually know that yet, do we?
No.
Well, you're saying though that 6 years ago, apparently, we used the same stabilization fund to staff a second ambulance, and that wasn't counted as guideline spending.
No, that is a question. It says, I'm interested to know if the use of the funds 6 years ago when the supplemental use was staffed was counted. There's no question mark at the end of
But it
the
is a
sentence,
question.
but it is a question.
I did not go into the documents, but I don't remember that. That was viewed as, the net amount that was going to come out of the general fund was what counted against the guideline, and they were still adding back. But I also don't remember if the amount that was taken in those years was as large as the drawdown that we're doing this year.
So the size of the amounts should be secondary, I think, to the process and the principle.
Agreed.
And that I don't think we know what best practice is. So where can we find out whether this is best practice or standard practice?
Let me just characterize it briefly for those who may be listening or watching at home or otherwise reviewing this at a later time. Fundamentally, the question on the table is whether or not the hiring of 4 additional staff to staff the ambulance at West Concord on a full 24/7 basis, which is largely 75% going to be underwritten by a drawdown, a one-time drawdown from a fund that was established years ago. If that drawdown ought to be counted as a budgetary increase, mainly because this is the hiring of staff. It's not a capital expenditure or a one-time spend, but this is an ongoing expense that will be added to the budget, and we will need to face up to those costs forevermore. And so we have a budget which is being crafted through a variety of sources, and we're only sort of supposed to judge on the increase to the taxpayer this year whether or not this is a prudent guideline. It was a prudent budget for the town to undertake. That's the question on the table. That was the question that was put to the town manager was, is this the practice for, one-time uses of special funds to augment the budget outside our guideline recommendation in order to achieve goals that are, true goals of the town. So that's what we're reviewing here, and this is response from the town manager is far from definitive. Let's just say that. I don't think that's.
So I think this matter begs several questions. One is whether this type of treatment is the invariant practice, or has been the invariant practice in this town. Another question is it the universally held invariant practice in all other towns? And if the answer to that is no, what proportion of towns treat it in a different way, and what is that way? So I don't expect the perfect answers to all of those questions tonight, but Carrie, do you have some comment you'd like to?
I would. I think the first thing that I would point out is also included in the packet is a copy of the warrant article, the motion or the vote under the warrant article that established this stabilization fund in the purpose for which the money was set aside. And it was set aside to offset public safety costs, increased public safety costs as a result of the Muse development. In speaking with the town manager, it was his recollection, and I know it's maybe not clear here, that when the funds were taken out in 14, 15, and 16, that was not counted against the guideline.
Okay.
I think that
it's not clear from
it's
the
not.
response. I'm sorry.
And he did ask. He does raise some other instances that came to mind when he was putting together the response of supplemental funds that were used to fund the budget, and he couldn't remember were those counted against the guideline or not. And so he did ask us to do some research. We didn't necessarily understand that we were bringing this back tonight. We know you have a meeting next week. We just finished putting together the enterprise budget book at about 6 o'clock tonight and got that off to the printer, so we don't have the answers to all of these questions. I think the fundamental issue here is that the guideline has always been a guideline on the increase in property taxes and not a budgetary increase overall. That's just been the practice, and I think that's, that is the fundamental issue.
See, I would add to that that the other part of that should be the ongoing impact on the budget. It seems as though it's being looked at in the 1 year, the current year. And I think one of the important issues here is that there's an ongoing budgetary impact beyond the current year.
Right.
So I would submit that should be a distinguishing factor, whether there's an ongoing impact.
But I think to make it a distinguishing factor, there's an assumption that as this funding falls off, that there's going to be an expectation that the guideline be increased to offset that. And that's, I don't think that's a given. I don't think that happened the last time. It was a way to phase in the first half of that ambulance service. And I don't necessarily think there was an expectation in the following years that the guideline was plus whatever was lost in that stabilization revenue. But I definitely, I understand the distinction between using it for a capital item, to purchase the ambulance versus operating the ambulance.
So, Terry, am I understanding you correctly? If you're saying it wasn't the understanding that the subsequent year's guideline would be increased as necessary to account for the no longer available stabilization funds, then that would mean that if the guideline wasn't so increased and the town manager kept to the guideline, it would necessitate the laying off of those people, would it not?
I think what I said was there's an assumption being made that as the funding from the stabilization fund is phased out over years, we're making an assumption now that when we get to 100% this service is covered in the general fund, that there's necessarily going to be an ask for the guideline plus additional funding to supplement. And I'm just not, I'm not really comfortable with that assumption because it might not happen. Other things may happen. There's no intention to lay off those staff. There is an intention to make that a continuing part of the budget. But that doesn't necessarily mean that other things haven't happened to make that happen without cutting something else. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the point that I wanted to make.
I just raised a point.
Microphone?
The way this is supposed to... you missed that little aside, right? The way this is supposed to be working is that in the previous years, there's a portion of these salaries that is within the guidelines budget and being funded out of the guidelines budget, correct?
Yes.
And each year that is increasing. So we have been funding these within the guidelines budget. Obviously, I mean, there is this assumption that eventually that 400, the total amount is going to be something we're going to have to deal with within the guidelines.
Yes.
And we, we've been doing that for several years incrementally, and now we're up to the whole piece. So I'm trying to find out, what's inconsistent about that, considering the way, we've been going.
So again, the guidelines deals with the percent increase in property tax. There are other revenues that support the budget. For instance, ambulance fees. Perhaps there is a look at the ambulance fees, and maybe the ambulance fees are there's a proposal to increase those to offset, or there's growth in other non-property tax revenue that could offset that cost.
You know, I guess I'm going to differ with you slightly on the fundamental assumption that the guideline is set to the tax increase, because we deal with the individual operating entities separately. We look at their particular characteristics and et cetera, and we set individual operating guidelines, and that does drive an overall tax result, and we do look at that. We use a spreadsheet that you run in real time to show us how much of our levy limit will be drawn down and what the tax impact would be on median tax. We do evaluate that, but it is one piece of a multivariate thing that we're doing here. And so we have a guideline of 4.42% increase for the town manager's budget for the operating guideline, and we have different percentages for the other entities. So there is some variation that we're able to observe, and we don't just say, here's the tax increase, let's just spread the peanut butter equally. We don't do it that way. So, you know, we've kind of taken this into account, and the number that we arrived at, town manager then came back and said, I've met your guideline. He's meeting it by pulling money from other places in the seat cushions. That's our concern. And the other thing I think that drives this concern is the concern that we've had and we've expressed at numerous meetings regarding multiple year commitments that we are making. They're made with collective bargaining agreements, they're made with other budgeting entities, but those tie our hands. This is tying our hands to future increases that we are now committing to. So that's probably where our consternation is coming from. That's the main concern. So, you know, we can, I don't know whether we want to have a policy vote on whether or not we believe this meets the guideline or does not meet the guideline.
Well, I think we want to have a policy vote, but not on this particular issue. I think this, is so far along in the process,
Right.
that my inclination is to leave it as it is. However, I do think that we ought to put on our agenda a general policy review of how similar budget line items should be handled and whether they should be within the guideline or outside the guideline. I have my own feeling about that, which we'll discuss when we have that policy discussion. I do want to make one comment that speaks to an impression that something Dean said may have left, and I know he didn't mean this, but I don't think the committee in any way thinks that the town manager has ever been anything but completely transparent.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to imply that at all.
I didn't figure you did.
No.
But I think in his reply, there was a statement about transparency, and I just wanted
In
the
fact,
manager and the public to know that we in no way have ever suspected.
no,
him of
in
not
fact,
being
in this year's budget book, the transfer pages, the additional pages of transfer accounts are much more obvious than in previous years. We have a few new pages called General Fund plus Transfers Budget, which helps us understand this kind of activity. So it is much clearer than it has been previously. I did not mean to imply that it wasn't transparent. I was just saying it came from sort of another bucket.
Going forward, is it possible that when we establish these funds, that we specify that in fact they would be used for capital or one-time costs as opposed to funding ongoing costs? Could we prevent this from happening in the future by stipulating that when we ask the town to establish these funds, or when we establish these funds to begin with? Can we do that?
Sure, and I think you hit on what I was just thinking in my mind is how would you ever use this fund if not just for a one-time cost? And I don't think when it was established, I don't think it was, I think the intention was to offset the cost of increased staffing for the ambulance.
Well, one thing that happened was that we were gifted an ambulance by a very generous woman who had felt that our EMS had been extraordinary in supporting her husband in his failing illness, and that then by virtue of this tremendous act of generosity, we could then look to the Muse Fund was then did not have to be earmarked for, I think it was a couple $100,000, and that freed up the ability to draw on the stabilization fund to start the staffing of the new piece of equipment.
So it was tied to a piece of equipment and not just for incremental people overall?
Well,
It was
when the
very
initial-
general, it was a
when the
very
initial
general
conversation for that cycle came up, we were going to need an ambulance and bodies. And then upon learning that Concord needed an additional ambulance, this woman very generously gifted the town the ambulance. And we bought the town then bought the equipment that's in the ambulance, and then started using the funds to pay down to smooth the ramp up of the expenses for the staff that were required. I don't remember that, I think that we did not use the stabilization fund to buy the interior equipment, if I remember correctly, but I wouldn't want to bet my life on that.
Isn't this exactly what a stabilization fund is established for? To smooth the increase in taxes, which is something that we are supposed to be looking at. I mean, it is something that we have to be cognizant of, and I think, making that a policy or something like that, or it would this is instructive of why we might want to do that in the future. But we do that when we're putting out debt service for schools, and we have a stabilization fund. There was a high school stabilization fund that was drawn down over a period of years to, again, do what we're trying to do, which is to reduce the increase in taxes.
That's a really good point, Carl, but I would make the distinction between something like a stabilization fund for interest expense that is going through a temporary period and then will naturally decline, with one that is, in effect, layering in ongoing budgetary costs. In fact, not all of them, because I don't think it includes the benefits and the OPEB. But in a sense, it's sort of suppressing the short-term impact and deferring and kicking the full impact of the decision down the road until the stabilization fund is no longer.
Which is what a stabilization fund does.
Well, so
eventually you have to pay
I'm
the
drawing
piper.
this distinction. That's one that actually increases over time, as opposed to one that peaks and then
And then
begins to
goes
decline.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would agree with the interest with your example, but I think this one's slightly different.
Different.
Okay, so I think if there's a general consensus that we will take up a discussion of policy around this, we can move on. And
I do want to see if the finance director has any insight into a potentially similar development around the archivist role, because I know that role was to be just sort of assumed from the library, but there's also some other negotiation or discussion that's going on there where private funding may also, in effect, increase staffing or otherwise fund, underwrite staffing on a short-term basis. Do you have any further updates or any updates on that?
Well, I think what I can say is that there is an ongoing discussion with the Library Corporation. There is an interest on the corporation's part to provide some additional funding to the town on a temporary basis to help mitigate the costs of that position. I don't really think I can go into any further detail because I don't know what the exact dollar amounts are. I know that it's still under discussion. So the issue is there are staff, I want to say two FTEs, a total of 2 FTEs at the library in the special collections department. One is a full-time position, and then there are 2 part-time positions. The curator is a full-time position, and her responsibility is to the special collections, but there's also an element to that of being the municipal archivist. And the roles are somewhat incompatible, and just the volume of work involved. They're really, the town is looking to have a full-time municipal archivist just working on municipal records. And there's a negotiation process to figure out how that's going to happen, because that funding has always been in the library and been used for the most part for special collections.
So it sounds like some of the responsibilities would be for one of those people to take on the archiving effort that is necessary, that the town needs to clean up its archives. And there may be some funding to do that archiving work so that the person can stay in the special collections department or one way or another. It sounds like a not dissimilar situation where some maybe portion of an FTE would be funded by other funding, but that responsibility would eventually be down to the town, when that funding expired. Either that or we finish our cleanup, and it's a little bubble where we have more work for a little while. I really don't fully aware of it, but it sounds like, to me, it's been described as a somewhat similar situation where external funding may come in from the library corporation to underwrite some amount of staff time that would prevent this person in the special collections department from having to not do their job over there. Somehow it's done.
I think that's the essence of the negotiation right now, whether or not an existing FTE or portion of an FTE in the library will be repurposed as a municipal archivist, or whether or not there will be an increase in the FTEs to maintain the same level at the library, but to add another person to do this other body of work that needs to be done. It is definitely on a much smaller scale, but if it is the latter where it's an additional staff, it may likely be that there's some temporary external funding to mitigate the impact.
Another piece of the same.
Yeah. So, robust conversation about that down the road makes sense.
Well, it sounds to me like it's going to happen in this budget cycle, whether.
And we know that part of the way that the guideline was met by not putting in the archivist, and so we're now tapping external funds to get a body in, and then we'll find out that we have to carry that.
And because it's private funding, there's not even a vote necessary to take it out of a stabilization fund, or it doesn't have to come from the town
Correct.
meeting, so it's
But
just.
at the point that the person is there, that potentially the finance committee of future years will be hearing that the outside funding dried up and the body is here, and the
Yes.
work needs to be done, and surprise, the salary has to come into the budget.
I can tell you the town manager's position is that one of the existing FTEs or portion of an FTE be repurposed.
Right.
That's his position. He's not looking for a new, an additional headcount.
We're not gonna add a head count to do this.
That's his position.
Okay,
That
and the
he's-
library staff.
The
Library Corporation would prefer not to see their special collections person repurposed, so they're.
Well, it wouldn't be the special collections person repurposed. It wouldn't be the curator, but it
The
would
director of the
be.
library doesn't wanna lose feels that there's enough work at the library that
Yes.
they need
They-
a head
they-
count, et cetera.
They
So
do the work in the
let the
special collections
negotiations go
department.
on, but this is another place where outside money drives funding of head count that can later boomerang back into the lap of the taxpayer.
That's the general drift, yeah. So to continue with our discussion of the guideline, let's just, to review, the town manager's budget is set at 25,299,513 for a percentage increase of 4.42%, and that does include these additional staffing elements that are funded for future years. We'll need to fund them more fully. That meets our guideline, so I think it's in the budget book. It's in alignment with our guideline. CPS, we have a small disagreement, not enormous, but it is a disagreement. The percentage increase that we recommended was 2.61, and the difference that they are asking for is 2.99, and I believe we're off by 145,025 or 143. I couldn't read my handwriting in another note. 143,025, and there's a lot going on within CPS this year. They're retooling the middle school to be 6 in Peabody, 7 and 8 in Sanborn. There's some capital costs associated with that. I don't know that drives any other inherent costs. It shouldn't. But they're close to meeting us, but they're not. And we're so I have a question which I'll get to when we go through the third number. The CCRSD has met our number, 4.44% increase at I think this is listed as our component, 19,996,874, and so we're really not in any disagreement with that. Regarding the relatively modest difference of opinion with CPS, is there any inclination on the part of the committee to move into agreement, or would we like to hold the line? And if we want to have discussion about that, I'm open to it. The thing I'm not clear about is whether or not we have any options beyond recommending affirmative action or no action. Would we be able to recommend our number? Can we just say we recommend a budget of X, but we are not going to stand up and try to amend their budget? But could we put in our finance committee report a separate recommendation, which we recommend a budget of 39,246,895?
So you're suggesting that.
Well, I've not seen it done before. That's all.
I think that's no action.
That's just no. So it's just no action.
Just no action.
I mean,
It just
and
seems
you're-
very binary
We're
to
free
say
to
no.
stand over the microphone and explain that the guideline was set where it was, and then whatever few supporting comments as to if that's the position, why we continue to prefer the guideline to the number in the warrant article.
So we
Yeah.
recommend no action as written in the document. That's really
Yes.
kind of our position. We recommend no action.
We could.
We reiterate the guideline.
Yeah. I think we would have to take the microphone. Okay. I was just wondering if there was any wiggle room or we could just recommend, and then we would kind of invite the town meeting to amend. It's kind of an invitation to amend, but we aren't going to do it ourselves.
And why wouldn't?
We can amend. You can go up
I-
and say we put no action and we put
I
forward.
don't know that the FinCom has been an activist, taken an activist role in that regard in the past, so I don't suggest that we do that now.
Well, let's talk amongst ourselves first and
Okay,
see
yeah,
how we
sure.
feel about it before we decide what the technique will be on the floor of town meeting. I remember sitting here about a year ago, and we were $250,000 apart with the school, if you remember that.
Mhm.
And at the time, I remember I was one of the people who advocated splitting the difference with the town, with the schools, because my reasoning was is that Dr. Hunter was new, she was doing the best job that she could as far as getting a handle on spending, and that I was hopeful that the zero-based budgeting exercise would bring up areas of savings. So here we are, a year ahead, and in fact, they did bring up areas of savings, but they overspent by a lot. They have cost drivers that are a lot more than. So in fact, they're spending $1 million more, $1,143,000. So I guess that my way of saying that I was hoping that this year we would have a budget that came in at guideline or even below guideline, given the cost, the zero-based budgeting efforts that we're going through. And I find out that we're asking for $1 million more and some change, this 143, that's the difference between our guideline. So I'm not inclined to back away from the guideline right now. That's my.
Andrea?
Do we know what's driving this difference, the override of our recommendation?
They have
If
a
there is,
presentation where they provided two sets of numbers, one where they identified a set of savings that the zero-based budgeting approach was able to, identify. And then there are a set of cost drivers that they say, okay, these things which are part of our normal budgetary process have to be increased. We have to increase our salary line. We have to increase our use of subs because we're allocating for them in a more appropriate way. And there's different drivers. I don't have it in front of me, but you have it in front of you. I don't have it in front of me. So the drivers of additional cost outstrip the savings that they've had through the zero-based process.
do any of the other articles proposed by the Concord Public Schools affect this at all? The bottom line on this?
No, I think we're at.
I think
Or
they're somewhat
are they-
independent. They do have a capital article, but I don't think that
I
is.
think we're at the bottom line now.
Yeah.
Well, so that makes sense, but I played around with some numbers that probably won't be universally popular in the room tonight. But, if you admittedly simplify dramatically and look at all funds requested for schools from the taxpayer, in other words, you add the budgetary increases to all of the requests in all of the separate articles, and I know some will suggest you have to break out, the region from the CPS, et cetera, et cetera. It amounts to $6 million on a base of 60, which is a 10% overall total increase in request for funding for all purposes. So I don't know, to answer Andrea's question, whether that's one way of looking at it.
So when you did just to be precise about it, when you did your ad on a request of 60, they're asking for 6, was the previous 60 that you're using as a baseline, did that include your capital articles from the prior?
So I just added up the fiscal 2019 actual budget amounts.
Actual budget amounts.
Exactly.
But in each budget year, they also have a capital article where they ask for capital.
Yep, I did not include that. No.
So.
No,
that
in
would
other
probably make the number-
words, I did
Yeah.
not restate this,
Yeah, but you
this
added-
going
but this year
backwards.
you added
I just looked at,
capital.
I assumed what's
Yeah, so it-
happened is done in,
I know, but I'm just saying.
so yes, and that's,
Prior to
I did not
the
restate it
numbers.
going backwards.
Yeah, okay.
No, okay. I just looked at
But
this
it's
year.
still, it is a big ask, and I'm not
Well,
arguing.
it's 6.23 million, or a 10.2% overall increase for all purposes, which is, at the end of the day, it falls in the taxpayers, So that is a related question to Andrea's, and I don't know the answer either, whether that's a good way to look at it or not.
you know, one of the things that we struggle with here is how deep into the weeds of a budgeting entity's individual budget
Yeah.
we want to actually dive.
Yeah. So I would agree with that, and I'd say that this is not that. This is very
This
simple.
is very high end.
This is very simple. This is not saying, no, I think 104 or 100 parking spaces is, you know, the right number, right? That's my definition of the weeds.
Yeah, okay. All right.
On the other side, I will say that, you know, we're looking, the schools are looking for 2.61% this year, which is lower than the amount that they got last year in increase.
They're looking for 2.99.
2 point, I'm sorry, I got the columns, okay, yeah, but it's still lower than
Yep.
what they got last year, yeah. I got my columns mixed up, yeah.
Well, and looking at the base of the adopted budget of 38.246, 895, if we back out the round number 1,000,006 of savings, then the base budget is more, the adjusted number from the prior year is more like 36.6 million, and the bump up is 2.7 million off of that. So the real increase in, once I've identified money I don't have to spend, and now I'm bumping up money, it's a big number. And, do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I know, I understand what you're
So,
saying.
and some of this was that categories shifted in terms of tour versus, some of those things, it's the same work being done, and so it's not precise, but it's disappointing that, once again, we're at it, didn't meet the guideline, even though they found 1,006 of savings.
And this is not the first time that this has been the way the budget has been presented. This goes back, John Flaherty used to do it. It is a common presentation model for them, which is to say, we found these savings, we're going to spend less in these categories, but we're going to spend more in these categories. We get this every year. It's not like this is a special year for this. So I'm struggling with
Well,
why this is different. It's different because there was a zero-based strategy, and they identified a pretty healthy amount of savings.
Right, and they spent it all and then some. And then some was enough that we didn't get within the
Right.
guideline and
Right.
not close, and,
Last year's cut.
Christine,
Um,
what's this for a second?
So I was here when we set the guideline. It was a reasonable process. It wasn't perfect. So it's not, I don't think that number is set in stone. So I'm looking more at the process that they went through. And if I remember right, this was the year that they had a contractual obligation to have a big bump on the CPS teachers to match the high school. So they were going in with not a lot of room in that budget to do much. So I sort of feel like, having watched the process, that they did a lot to come back with. I agree, zero-based budgeting often comes up with more savings than they found. It's the first time they did it. I think they gave it, I think they had a good process, and I think they've been transparent about it. So I'm happy with what they did. I agree. I always, the number could be lower, but there was no, to me, the 145,000 or the difference, 143. Okay, I guess I'm a little interested in why they're not negotiating, but other than that, I'm not that unhappy with it.
And I have to say, Christine, you beat me to the punch, because my question was going to be, with this increase, how much of it is discretionary and how much is non-discretionary? And the lion's share, I think, was probably non-discretionary because of the reasons that Christine just said. We all know that the personnel costs are the overwhelming factor in the budget, and if you're locked into that, even with, no matter what kind of budgeting system you're using, the best you can do is really nibble around the edges, and if you're at the regional high school, you maybe cheat a little bit on OPEB. You don't fund that as much as you'd like. You draw from the E&D fund. And that's what we're battling. The bigger issue is how do you get ahead of the contract negotiation process. And I think Peter Fischelis asked us early on, he said, when I was involved with this, I could have used some guidance, which they didn't have. And that's how we end up in the sort of as backseat drivers. I don't think Lori had a whole lot of wiggle room in this budget. So I'm inclined myself to support their budget.
So those are two really good points, and I don't really understand the whole process, but what you described is something that they negotiated in contract negotiations. So on the one hand, we're saying that's baked in the cake, which it is, but we need to give some guidance going forward. And the guidance that we're giving is that whatever you decide, whatever you negotiate, we're just going to underwrite and wave through, is what I'm hearing.
No, that's not the intent. You can hold to the guideline budget, but based on all the previous meetings or the town meetings that I've been to, it's going to be a little bit of, it's going to be vague, right? It'll get voted through. Anyway,
So
I'm trying to be more proactive here. and
Well,
say it's
so
the
I
next
was
budget,
trying
the next
to also,
negotiation. Yeah.
in terms of future negotiation, which is really
Oh, okay.
the only
All right,
one
yeah,
that
all right.
matters.
Yeah.
But it just sounded like what I'm hearing from both sides is that, we're not giving any forward guidance based on the way we're dealing with what has already been decided, i.e. effectively just passing it through. And part of the guidance could be, that it needs to be, actually negotiated, maybe somewhat differently.
I think future
Or-
contracts do need.
That's what I'm hearing, that they need to be, but that they're not. But we're not sending that message.
But I think we did, because really that's all they got, right? So whatever else they would have wanted, they didn't get, and they didn't ask for, because all they had was the stuff they had committed to. So they came back with a bunch of savings, and I'm sure there were other things they would like to spend it on, but they couldn't, because all the money we gave them was, all right, then you can put it all to salary. That's their choice.
Out of that $2.6 million in their cost drivers, 1.1 of that was contractual. So I just want to make sure that we're clear that out of that 2.6, 1.1 was
So a little less than half.
yeah, so there are other things that are in this $2.6 million number besides just things that were locked into contractual.
So that'd be roughly
That's how I'm reading.
1.5.
Right, of other things. Yes. And some of that is, again, sped is something that they really can't do anything about, but I think there's some room in there.
But SPED's been adequately explained as a good investment. What's going on there?
Oh, right.
So that
Exactly,
cost
exactly.
makes sense.
No, exactly. So I'm saying the contractual and the sped to me were, gotta pay for.
Ray, you can also net out the cost driver of sped against some cost savings for out of, if you turn the page and look at the cost savings, they're saving on out of district.
Yeah.
A pretty good number there, I think, special education tuition.
So
It's 700,000 was the saving. So it's in the sped cost.
Right, so that nets it.
It did not run more than nets it. At the risk of, getting down into the line items, which we're doing, we're saying we're so close. Why can't we all just get along? The only thing I focused on, and I asked it at the hearing, I wasn't particularly satisfied with the answer, had to do with basically what they're calling an add back in the budget drivers of supplies and materials. Now what they said they did, which I understand, is that they deferred a curriculum by at the tail end of a 3-year contract for their math curriculum that covers all of K-5. So they use a specific PC-based math curriculum that's quite expensive. It's like $90K a year for the whole system. And they defer to, that, so they're adding that, you have to get that back gauged. But that's a pretty big uptick in supplies and materials, and the way they described it was, well, to meet our guideline last year, we just counted every last pencil and crayon and really didn't we really stripped that covered bare and we're just adding that back. But that's a pretty big add back, and if you want to add it all back in 1 year, that's what.
Remember now, though, that this is a subscription-based program.
It is, but I think that the way that was described is that it's a 90K piece of the 420. So it wasn't, that's why I said it was not totally satisfactory answer to me as to why that number was as big as it was. It is a big nut in the middle of that 420, but it's almost 100,000 of it, but it didn't describe it to me that there wasn't so much in there.
I guess the interesting question then would be, what would be the alternatives if you don't do this software subscription?
No, I'm not,
program?
let them have the software subscription. As it was described, that was 90K of the 420, so now you're down to 330. What's in there? Are you adding, I just feel as though it's.
There is someone in the room who could answer that.
Yeah, I don't know, Mr. Brown can. Oh, Lori's
No,
back
I'm
there.
sitting here eagerly wondering if I get to talk.
Can you
Yeah.
answer that, please?
Yeah.
I would be very
You know,
happy
I have to
have you answer
itemize
that.
it
I'm sorry
across-
that I'm sorry that I
I'd
did
have to
not know.
itemize it across 5 schools in all the departments, because what we did last year was just take a level amount right off the top of their supplies. This year, they had to itemize it all back to us and say what they needed.
Can you
and
step up
defend it.
because nobody in the television can hear you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Probably good. And I don't have on my big binder of all the itemized work that they did.
Well, thank you,
with us.
because I'm sure you can
But-
describe it a lot better than
Yeah, what we did
Whatever.
last year was just cut 3% of their supply lines with no discussion with them as to what they needed out in the buildings. This year, through the zero-based process, they had to provide to us what they were gonna use those funds for. Almost 100,000 of it is that 3-year subscription for
Right. everyday
math. It's 3 years, it's a 90-some thousand over 3 years, so it's not 100,000 annually. That's the trick, and they're all getting very clever in their publishing strategies on how we pay those funds. So this year, we need to front the money for the next 3, and then we can probably drop it again like we did last year, because we can't just spread it 30,
Right.
30, 30, which would be a much better conversation with all of you. We're trying to get the publishers to get more flexible on that. They're just not there yet. They're all strategizing how to stay flush when we're not buying hard copy text. So really what we did was sit with every department. We actually trailed back their request from what they started with, and note a whole lot of stuff. To us, this is the instructional core, though, of what we're doing with kids. So it isn't going to be the first place we cut. I'm not going to sit here and say we haven't been trying to figure out where there might be funds. I have, if anything, there's been needs coming in since the budget was brought to the school committee and voted on. So we're now trying to be sure we can meet all of those needs through contingencies and all of that. So I've had to say to the committee, I'm not comfortable cutting the 143. And I guess the bottom line for me, we brought you a budget in under 3% and worked really hard to do that. I think I've heard your hopeful long-term guideline be at 285. I'm not sure where the 26 came from exactly. I hear the message on the contract and all that. It was a double year. I don't think we'll ever want to do that again. There'd be no reason to. The equity discussion is over, all of it. So there is a huge another one-time bump in there that doubled our contractual costs. We can all debate that tonight, whether that was the right thing to do. I wasn't here. It's done. It's done.
Right.
So I sort of was hoping we could just get to the guideline because we're under 3%. None of your other budgets are there, including my regional budget. That was close, but not quite. And we just would love to. I know we're going to have healthy discussion on other topics here, so this would be one we'd love to close. So I guess I'll defend anything you want me to, but we're really proud of what we brought you, and we did work really hard. We can defend every dollar. If I brought the 3-inch binder with me, I'd be glad to do that.
I don't think we
That's
need to
my pitch to you
relitigate that,
tonight.
honestly.
Yeah, so.
We're just trying to figure out whether this committee can move up to meet you, whether you guys are able to come to the middle, whether Or I was looking for some middle ground recommendation, which, like, we recommend this number as opposed to no action, which just sounds so definitive. We recommend no action. I'm not very happy with that.
Well, I would absolutely agree that the number sub 3% is very, very impressive. And the number 285 was mentioned.
It's almost 1% less than last year.
Yeah.
I'm kind of coming around to something you said, Christine, was the process we used to set this guideline is not a perfect process. And it maybe is the start of a conversation, and so now we're having the conversation. So I'm softening my earlier position.
Carrie, can I ask, you had some numbers regarding revenue up there before. Are these, does this chart represent including those numbers?
So this was the quick update that I was going to provide you, and the answer is yes, because there's no change proposed. What has happened since you set your original guideline is the governor has put forward his proposal for fiscal 20. On the town side, the net increase in aid versus charges is about $6,000, so it's nothing to get excited about now. The state budget has a long way to go through the process. Our local receipts, we had already included a 2.2% increase, and right now they're running about 1.2% over the prior year. It's a little bit of a slow time. The spring is a busier time with building permits. We're waiting to get motor vehicle excise receipts in. So I think the 2.2% increase that we have is fine, even though we're running a little behind that, but I wouldn't propose to increase that at all.
So is that distorted by the change in the tax law that brought forward property tax payments to the end of 2017?
I feel
No.
like we just got off track.
No.
here.
What are we looking at?
Yeah,
I don't
Well,
know.
I want to make a judgment. I just want to make our judgment overall on what the property tax
Tax
increase is
increase.
going to be.
Oh,
And what I was seeing in the chart
Right.
didn't make me feel very happy.
Right, okay, so you want to go back to the
Yeah, let's go
spreadsheet?
back. I just wanted to find out whether there was any other source of relief in that regard. So we're going from a 3.28% to a 3.45% property tax increase, which is not trivial.
So wait, I need help reading this chart. If we go with the guideline that we voted, the property tax increase would be 3.58%. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
And if we, can you
No,
count?
that's a change in the budget, the change in the property taxes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This other
3.28.
column.
Yeah, the middle column, that's, yeah.
3.28, okay. So what is the change if we increase the guideline by 143,000?
That's the purple column, I gather, right?
Yep. You would go from 3.28 to 3.45.
Yeah, I was hoping for some relief on that.
And the unused levy limit drops.
Yeah.
So that's about a $260 increase on median sort of tax bills.
Seems like a
No.
lot.
That's not right.
Yeah, that's a lot, yeah.
Something wrong.
Yeah. That's even worse.
Can't be $200.
That doesn't make any sense.
It just doesn't feel.
I can get it for you in a minute if my spreadsheet opens.
I just don't think that could be true. Because here you're saying $150,000 increase at a median would be like about $20.
You're right. $19.55.
Right, okay. And yet below, it was coming in a lot, on the prior spreadsheet, it was coming in a lot higher than that. The adding 143,000.
How does this work with CapEx? So this excludes CapEx?
Yeah.
This
This
includes
This
the
is just
middle
Except for-
school and all that?
No, this
It's the whole
includes,
thing.
But the tax increase includes everything.
this includes everything
It
within the
does?
levy, including CapEx within the
Okay,
levy.
so maybe we can get to that discussion, because I think there's a lot more room in that than there is in this. So that's my observation. You
In-
want to get the 140, get it out of CapEx. Those estimates we know are.
Well, no, the CapEx is being run as debt, so you're not gonna just take
Yeah.
140 and get
We own it.
money. 'Cause
The
it's
ring
gonna be-
road bit, that's,
It's debt within the levy limit, but it's still debt, so
Okay.
you're still gonna be paying it off over time.
okay, so it's not going to have a full impact.
No.
I get it.
This spreadsheet does not, this only deals with the budget articles. This does not include the capital for the district or the feasibility study.
It's exclusively, even,
Okay, I'm sorry.
This-
It
So the
doesn't
tax
show that-
increase
it doesn't
won't
show
be
the
that, but it'll-
Median increase in the tax bill either. I thought it did.
This is just due to the operating budget.
This is just operating budget, okay.
Yeah.
But if we go with the 143, if we relax the guideline, it would be cost each household about $20 more a year. Is that correct?
At median.
At median. At median. Median. The median tax bill would equal about $20.
you seem to have reached an inflection point here. Does anybody care to make a motion?
This is nothing compared to what's going to happen with the middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah, but all we can do is yes or no with that.
I'm almost tempted to make, like split the difference just to make a point. Or not approve, but, I don't know.
Well, so I'll second that motion, Carl. I mean, I move that we, compromise at a 2.85% level.
Okay, I'll second that.
Let's go back and see what that is. Any discussion? I just want to see the number. Let's consider,
Is that up there?
well, what she needs to do is change the number from 143 delta to 70, 7150 or whatever. So we gotta add 71 and change over here.
We're not punishing the CPS budget because the town budget is so much higher, are we?
No. No, they're separate, as Jean pointed out earlier. At least that's what.
Not when you get to the aggregate,
That's,
not when you get to the aggregate.
But the aggregate includes them at the town at their guideline, and it's not
Yeah,
distorted by the fact that they're.
But they
used
had
to-
a big jump in the guidelines. One way to think about it is Lori did a better job with the CPS budget than, holding things down than the town. And yet,
But
she's getting a harder time for her budget.
But the town also had a lot of contractual obligations driving their.
And so did.
Yeah, but I don't know if we want to go through all the cost drivers. The 1.1 is just the teachers, so I also had other drivers and other salaries that were contractual.
From a head count
So if you
perspective,
put
the
us-
town added a lot of heads.
So if you put us at, we're at two, if you split the difference, Carl, you're at 107, 634, a 2.8% increase. And
No, I don't think so. I'm speaking for myself.
I don't think so.
It wasn't intentional.
oh boy, where are we?
I compartmental.
CPS.
So what are you waiting for, Dean?
I guess no more discussion, we're ready for a vote on splitting the difference here.
The new number is 2.8% for the final guideline for CPS.
Okay, so Terry just put that in there?
It's right up there.
Yep, okay, yep.
Or the 71,634, 2.8%.
So, by way of discussion, if we vote in favor of splitting the difference, let me put it differently, a vote against splitting the difference, if it goes against splitting the difference, it throws us back to a decision between no action or accepting.
Yes.
So it's 3.38.
So this, if we split the difference, we're still would recommend no action, just so we're clear here.
I don't know.
No, unless
Don't we get to
because,
talk about
well, they
that?
could come back, yeah, that's a possibility.
Okay, you mean if we don't agree, we have to have
If
no action?
if we are not in agreement with the budget proposed, our recommendation at town meeting is no action.
That's what you do.
Well, that's really what the vote should be then.
Because if it's, whether it's
Do we back the
140 or
budget?
70.
Yeah, it should be.
But what happens is that now the school.
We're
committee
sort
has
of
an
giving
opportunity
them
To meet
a month or so
They
to sort
still
out.
have that opportunity to come in.
at the town meeting.
Well, I mean, I guess if we vote affirmative action, that they're not gonna find any savings between now and town meeting.
No, it's
But if we voted,
I'll put, you know,
I'm sort of torn because on the one hand, I want the school committees to understand that we really would like them to keep pressing.
Can
to
you rest
hold.
assured they understand and hear your message?
Okay. On the other hand, I don't have a desire to, I think it's a mighty small difference, frankly, and I'm extremely loath to say, oh, what the hell's $143,000, because I don't feel that way. But on the other hand, I don't feel inclined to drive them to go back and find $143,000 worth of savings.
no, we would be driving them to go back and find 71, yeah, 0.5,
We
yeah.
would be asking them.
We'd be
Asking,
asking.
yeah,
We'd ask them to
right,
commit
yeah, we
to
don't
that.
drive, we ask.
We'd ask them to commit to that.
Yeah.
That's what we're asking.
And we could see, I mean, we still have another opportunity, you know, we quite often have done the final thing just before town meeting.
My point is,
Yeah.
whether it's $71,500 or $143,000, I don't think it's enough. The game isn't worth the candle to me. At this point, I would say I would vote in favor of altering the guideline to meet what they've presented and just accept that with the expressed intention to jointly keep the pressure on and say, you know, especially with new contracts being negotiated, these things have to be watched carefully. We want moderate increases in the future. So.
You have a motion on the table.
We have a motion to split the difference.
Andrew wants to.
How do you keep the pressure on?
I think we're doing it right now,
We are, okay.
this conversation.
Then, in that case, I think that $70,000 here or there, I could use it, but in terms of the budget of the town, the schools and everything, I think it starts to sound petty. If we're trying to put pressure on, but we're not going to put any more pressure on this year. I think we either have to say, go with it, or no, we don't accept it. I don't think splitting the difference is
Right,
saying very much.
so my intention is to vote against splitting and to make a motion that we accept the school committee's.
Yeah, we still have this other motion on the table, so.
So I can just withdraw it.
Right.
Well, you could,
Well,
but
you could, but we could take the vote, and then Tom can vote against it.
do I have a second?
It's Charles' motion.
It's also-
Well, John made the motion.
Oh,
I can make the motion.
I'll make a motion. What, was it seconded?
You what?
It was.
You were the seconder.
Oh, I made it.
You made the motion.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna.
Sorry, Carl, I didn't mean to say that.
Okay, no, I don't plan on withdrawing the motion.
We do want to get out of here tonight.
Yeah, but, you know,
Are you rescinding your second?
Let's take a vote, because this is what we have to do, because we have to decide. So all those in favor of the motion to split the difference at $71,000. Okay, all those opposed to that. Hear that the motion fails. Back to our original guideline.
I move that we recommend, that we increase our guideline to meet the CPS budget as presented, including the 143,000 in excess of our previous guideline.
I would second that.
Discussion. Okay, all those in favor of the motion by the chair? Opposed?
Good for you.
It carries with 2. Do we need to make a record of those votes just so that we have a minute? Well, we can do it via the video. Oh, you're taking this. Okay, Carrie's got it. Okay, thank you, Carrie. Didn't know you were doing double duty. So.
You can't get the videos anymore.
The budget that it's in agreement. All good. Okay, so our 3 guidelines appear to be, we put to bed the firefighter question, we changed the guideline for CPS, so I think our business there is done.
Thank you.
Uh,
So we now move on to the review and approval of the 5-year forecast.
Oops, Carl?
Oh, the forecast, go ahead.
Or-
Next item, when we get there.
Mr. Clerk.
Dean, do you want to say anything about the model in general?
Yeah, we didn't really do anything dramatic this year to change the way this is done, so I'll try to describe it from my years in the past as how this model operates. I still feel as though some alternative to this might be advisable, but I don't have a grand scheme for that. The way this model operates, and we don't have hard copies, one of the things that is, we do have, it's perfect. This is what we have. Okay, if you turn to page 5, you can see that what we have here is kind of a pro forma view, a summary view of the budget from the perspective of the 3 operating budgets for which we set a guideline, other general costs to the town, some of which are shared between CPS and the town, like insurance and OPEB and retirement. This form this year has consolidated all of our debt service into excluded and non-excluded debt with the town and with various other entities like CCRSD and Minuteman.
sorry, Dean, what page is that you're looking at?
Page 5.
Page 5.
Page 5, yeah, that's this document, John. That document, there you go.
Yeah, okay,
There you
thank
go.
Yep,
Okay.
that's I'm with you, thank you.
Okay? And then we have a series of resources. Now, the way in which the projection is done is that each of the lines that you see, including the resource lines, where we get pilot or we get free cash or whatever, each of these lines has 3 discrete 5-year projections which are made. And these projections can be made in 2 ways. They can be made with hard numbers. If we know the debt service payouts that we are committed to, those are hard numbers. We just plug them in and there's no discussion. If we want to say that a particular line item is going to increase by percentages, which we are guessing, then we use percentages. And in some cases, there's a blend. If we have hard numbers for estimated school population increases. We can make very detailed calculations as to what we think our percentage piece of the CCRSD budget would be, and there's a whole separate piece of this model that tries to manage that calculation. And so what that drives is the projection lines that run to the blue bar. The 5 forecast years are driven by these projected percentage increases that are baked in the cake, so to speak, that are part of the modeling. And a set of those are extracted for your review starting on page 1. And those are the 3 budgeting entities with projections for how we want to, project out their budget increases, and we can discuss these, and Carrie can take our changes back to the department, and they will plug in any changes we have. These are the series of growth projections that are built in the model right now. They're in this memo, and we can look at these and say, no, we don't agree. We think that, for CPS, we don't want to see a series on the low end of 3.5 trending down to 3.3.
When you're saying want, I mean,
Well, it's our,
what we want is something related to a different set of numbers, so that we're talking about a sustainable growth rate and so on.
right.
And
what
what
we
so-
project.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah.
So what we want to put in the model. I'm sorry to I have to be just careful there, but so the there's a little bit of text here that describes how we're trying to estimate the next 5 years and what the most likely thing might be for the next 5 years. And then there's alternative 1, which is sort of lower than the most likely, and alternative 2 is a higher projection than the most likely. So, it says the 5-year trend in the town budget is 3.99. Now, we've seen that chart time and again, which shows the growth of our tax bill, which I'm sure I have one in here, but hold on, I'm sure I can pull one out. Here we go, this one. You've seen this time and again, where it shows how everything's going up. So if we take the last 5 years, we've had some rather strong increases in our taxes. So that to take the 5-year trend of 3.99 or the 10-year trend of 3.69, the most likely scenario built in this model is 4% for town budgets.
Well, an interesting question is, if we're trying to make sure that all of our budgeting entities know that we dealt with the fact that the contractual obligations drive these, where they make increases, I wouldn't want the teachers thinking that I'm down with a 4% number.
Right.
Going into the budget, like, these are big numbers. This isn't, all one isn't even a number that we're entirely
Well,
thrilled with.
that doesn't support a sustainable growth rate.
No, right, these numbers are, and
So-
so whether,
So this is a separate exercise from the sustainable exercise. This is an exercise in what do we think the taxes are actually going to be. And so that is something I think that really is distinct from what do we wish for.
well, I think it's possible that we put in a fourth line that says, this is what the sustainable is, and
That may,
that the 3 lines that we've mapped out are based on where our trends have been.
so I'll make a suggestion that is a fantastic idea for next year's model. We are on short, we're in a short mode, and we haven't even had that come to town meeting for approval. It is our goal to be able to do that, but right now, we're not in a position with the amount of time we have in meetings and all the rest of it from here to town meetings to really get that done.
It is possible, though, in our verbiage,
Yep.
to emphasize in bold print that these are based on historical trends and do not necessarily reflect what FinCom was thinking would be an appropriate level of spending.
I think that's-
Without drilling down and trying to define what's the number, or do
I think
anything
that's-
beyond that, or that, in looking at this, the FinCom has great concerns, and that this does not even reflect any of the capital projects that are pending.
So,
So that people understand that, one, that the budgeting entities and the entities that are negotiating the contracts understand that this isn't the blueprint for the future.
so among the CPS, CCRC, and the town, I don't know how many collective bargaining units there are. I mean, there are one each for the different school systems.
Now they have secretaries and bus drivers, and so there's lots of little, smaller contracts, but yes, for the schools, the teacher contracts are the biggest driver of
Carrie,
the wages.
Do you know how many collective bargaining units there are in the town?
In the town and the schools, I would say there's probably
No, the schools we
15.
know,
There's
but
there's probably 15 in total.
15 units.
Yeah.
And are they all on 3-year cycles?
Yes.
So all of the, say, 17 collective bargaining units we have to deal with are on 3-year cycles. And we know, I can't recall what they are, but what is the end of our 2 school union contracts?
The CTA is up now, and the CCTA next year.
What, I didn't,
The CPS contract expires at the end of this school year,
okay.
and the regional end is the next year. So at any given time, there's
Okay.
contracts being
So-
negotiated across the whole.
Right, so my point is, we can predict what the level of salaries are going to be at CCRSD for the next fiscal year. But beyond that, we're guessing. We're putting in.
For all of this, we are. We're
We're
doing
putting
our
in,
best
and we
estimate.
can put in what we would like to see it be.
Well, we might want to say that the alternative one, which we tend to use as the low-end estimate of the more, we'll just call it the more conservative estimate,
Call it the sustainable.
would be where we want to plug our sustainable numbers. This is what we would love to see. That would not be considered the most likely outcome, at least not right now.
No,
I just doesn't seem, you know,
Either.
So,
I don't know how else to
so why
describe
not,
it.
maybe I'm being,
most likely outcome given current trends.
Yeah, right.
so why not use our sustainable growth rate as the most likely?
Because it's not.
We're locked into these contracts that.
No, this is only for the period during which we're not yet locked in, which will be, if we're projecting 5 years, will be 3 and 4 years,
So,
or actually
so the
4 and 5.
the somewhat problematic use of the sustainable, what I call the sustainable rate for the most likely is that that is in the middle of a band of less likely but less expensive and less likely but more expensive. And it just seems unlikely to me that you're going to get any possibility of less expensive than the sustainable rate. So I would suggest.
Well, I would say if you choose what you peg as your sustainable rate as the low end, you're guaranteeing you're not going to get that.
Yeah, I just think that we're changing the nature of this exercise right now, right on the fly. But we can do that. We're able to do that. So if that is your.
So actually, aren't we dictated by what the town passes as far as what this exercise should be illustrating?
Right.
This is supposed to be illustrating the most likely.
Yeah, so what does it
It says
say?
most likely.
They're requesting they make a 5-year projection of what the total tax burden is likely to be on the citizens. Likely to be.
So-
It's likely to be. So,
Well, I think, it's legitimate to say we're projecting current trends.
Right.
But maybe showing something else that we think it should go to is a useful use of this tool.
So
For that lower, the lower one.
I'm thinking, I have two things in mind. One, a remark that Peter Fischler made to us, that when he was in the position of having to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement, he wished that he had had some tools, some backup, some guidance. And I think that both in the sustainable growth rate projection and in the portions or the elements of this projection that we're doing that are not yet set by contractual arrangement, we're free to put in what we see as being the most prudent.
Say what
we can define the most
we are also obligated
Well,
to say
so-
what is most likely.
We are obligated to say what is most likely.
And so we could be driving down the road and see where we're heading for a wall, and if we keep driving in that direction, most likely we're gonna hit that wall. But we would like to see turning right. Turning some way so you don't hit the wall.
So let me ask this question, Dean. On your 5-year forecast here, 21, 25, Proposition 2.5 levy projection by scenario, you have your alternative.
different documents.
Sorry, but this is on topic. You have your alternate scenario 1, keeping that red bar from flipping
Where are you?
negative. So I'm on the 5-year chart here.
So in this document,
In that document, yeah.
And this is the levy capacity chart, which is always a
So-
concern to me.
But so my question that's on topic is, should that be part of the sustainable growth rate goal to prevent that red bar from flipping negative the way all the other scenarios do by 2024? Is that one of the goals of the sustainable growth rate? Should that be our objective, to design a scenario that prevents us?
Here's where I come out on the levy limit
Yeah.
and Prop 2.5. It's my opinion, but if, conservative folks may have a different one. I consider it an artificial fixed limit, and whether the town wants to have certain spending or do certain projects is up to the town. If we want to spend more than 2.5% in a given year, that is our right. So it is a break on small government entities like a town meeting with a few hundred people
Right.
spending everybody's money.
Yeah.
But if the town decides it wants to build a high school and has an exclusion vote to do so, then we're going to have higher taxes.
Well, but an objective like that, though, would highlight, the consequences of any decisions that might be
Right,
taken
we
at town
may end
meeting.
up
So
with
that needs to be
We
clarified.
may end up with year after year ballot votes to sustain our budgets.
Correct.
And that is a possibility.
Okay.
But it.
But so my question is,
Independent
should
of
our
whether that's
objective
the
be
right
to
budget.
avoid that, is my question. No.
I don't know that that's.
But
a
no,
political
I
guideline process.
see the Proposition 2.5 and going below the levy limit as somewhat an indication of not the best fiscal management.
I wonder if Moody's sees it
You can
that way.
manage that way.
I wonder if the credit rating
Well, no,
agency sees it that way.
We're
I don't know
maintaining
the
the
answer
cash
to that.
balance and we're voting for these budgets. It's probably not.
But, yeah, but then your planning also is subject to the vicissitudes of the town meeting. Well, all
So
of the override.
The
Ballot,
override vote.
ballot.
Exactly.
just, John, just to offer an observation on what you just asked. My experience has been the credit rating agencies don't have any issue with overrides if they are approved. But if you have a
As long as they
history,
keep getting
yes,
approved.
if you have a history of putting them forward and not being approved, then that has a negative impact on the rating.
So if it's not approved, the money isn't spent though.
It's
Right,
not
but it's an
approved, you do it.
indication of voters.
willingness to
Right,
pay.
so a rating is
For
taxed
anything.
ability and
Yeah.
willingness to pay. And if the voters are voting no, then you're just signaling a lack of willingness to pay. Right?
So the more you spend, the more you go into, the better, the higher your credit rating.
You look like you're willing and you're able,
Well, that's
you can
true.
spend all you want when they're.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's more common in other towns. I mean, some towns, correct me, right? But some peer group towns more habitually, you know.
Have overrides.
Overrides.
We have a fairly unique issue here of being under the levy limit.
Right, we are,
That's because
We
we
did
put a
go
lot
through
of
a period of
excluding.
using them.
Sorry, say again?
We did have a period of using them.
Yes.
And then as new growth kicked up, that took some pressure off. And then we've also handled some of their expenses in other ways, like through CPC and for capital, you know. They came below the line and not in the operating budget, and we avoided
Right.
having to do the override votes.
Yeah. Got it, okay.
But this is overrides for the operating budget.
Yes, but
So my question really was, should that be a goal of the sustainable growth rate and this committee to avoid overrides? And I guess not.
you know, it's, I don't think it's inherently a goal of the sustainable growth rate. I think the sustainable growth rate, the 2.5 is a fixed number. What if we enter a period of reasonably high inflation, 70% inflation? Now what are you talking? Now how are you going to maintain your town and stay at 2.5? It's not really doable. So it's an artificial thing, and it's the budgets to the town to vote on, which we've had a pretty decent history of voting for excluded debt and building schools at a pretty good clip. So I just think it's not
Well.
that relevant to our discussion of the sustainable amounts.
I would also look, I don't know, because I don't have the finance committee report in front of us, but we do sort of state that there are certain principles that we do kind of use as policies, and I think actually there's a separate policy document too.
We have a pretty healthy set of financial policies that
Yeah.
Kerry operates under.
Right, but also, and it's also in the finance committee report, but I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know whether it speaks to the proposition 2.5, keeping or ignoring proposition 2.5.
So, that was a roundabout discussion, but we want to review these. Now, we're just getting these tonight, so, you know, we probably have an opportunity, one more opportunity. Well, actually, this belongs in our report, so we need to do something about this.
So Dina, the chart that's figure 1, so am I reading it right, that the most likely, actually the rate comes down from where we are now? Is that how I read that?
That's how I would read that.
So even with most likely, which is based on historical trends, you know, with some estimates you've made, the rate is going to drop.
It's going to drop into I'll call it trading range. I mean, if you can see, we're sort of at a high point in the current proposed year, sort of a high point, but in the previous years, you know, we were down at 4 quarter.
Yeah.
So it's down below that.
So the good news is at least it's not continuing to climb.
It doesn't appear
Is the
to.
middle school revenues?
No, it is
Yeah,
not.
this is-
That's in the blue, that's in the blue highlight on the first page. It says
So this is
no.
just operations.
Just not.
So as per Christine's question, it levels off at about 4.5%, which is more than twice, you know, the expected inflation rate. And should that not be one of the, important determining metrics?
Yeah, we would prefer not to see it look like this. I think that's
But we see that most likely we're gonna hit that wall.
Carl, I don't get your allusion to the wall. I'm not.
Well, that's the blue line, right? And it's over 4%. And we know that at 4%, that's, above what we had been projecting as the sustainable growth rate, based on basically based on what we thought people could afford relative to the metrics that we were using, which was CPI and the 10-year treasury and so on, that we had come up with this sustainable growth rate. We did come up with it. We haven't had a town meeting vote on it yet, but we have it, which is below 4%.
right.
Are we gonna,
So, if we don't stay on the sustainable growth rate, again, that metaphor of hitting the wall that's where we're going.
Okay.
are we going to present a number at the town meeting for the sustainable growth rate?
That's been decided.
Didn't believe we are going to present a number, but
We are?
It seems to me that would be a really likely question someone would ask. If this were in effect, what would the number be?
Sure.
I agree.
So I think we need to have either a number and/or a formula, or some
I
methodology
agree.
that
And that was certainly the
explains.
feedback we got at the hearing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
that's what.
That was the feedback we got at the hearing.
Yes.
Yes?
That was, that we should have a number?
The people, it was too vague.
Or a process.
It was too vague to figure out what we were talking about, so I think you need an example and a number.
Okay, so let's try to do something simple here, because we do need to get this, we need to finalize this memo. Let's turn to page 2. These are not controversial things. We have group insurance, which has been estimated at projected annual increase of 8% with a high and a low of 10 and 6. Anybody have any questions about that? This is going to be like a consent calendar
No,
thing.
and these are not the big drivers.
These are not the big drivers. I mean, I just want to finish these 2 pages, then we'll go back to page 1.
Okay.
Okay? So everybody's okay with that? 8, 6, and 10, we're good. All right, OPEB, it says the annual contribution has been met. Projection assumes a 3.5% annual increase. We don't see anything lower than that, so the low end is 3.5, and the high end is 7.5. We think we're going to contribute 7.5% increase annually of 7.5
Not in the near future.
So
So
let
we
me ask
want
you
to
a
knock
question.
that back a little bit?
Is that the art, the 7.5?
Why do we
Well, that's
think
a
that's
discount.
such a high? That feels like that should just go, we should just go with one number for all 3
So-
projections.
Well, we certainly can do that. Some of these, I was just trying to, okay, what's the most conservative estimate to put in this case? And so the ARC is determined based on the enrollment we have and the cost of the health insurance plans and our investment returns. And so maybe that's too high, but I was just trying to, what's a very conservative estimate in this case?
So does the Medicare estimate that healthcare costs should increase at 5.5% for the next decade factor into this group insurance and OPEB equation? And if I told you that was the number, would it change these ranges? Because that is the number.
For OPEB?
And for group health insurance.
Well, so for group health insurance, I looked at what our trend,
Okay.
our particular trend.
That's
is
fair
at.
enough. Yeah. And what rate was that? Was that,
And
remember?
it's really closer to 8%.
Okay.
Now, we're looking to make all kinds of changes, so hopefully that will bring that number down, but that's
Okay.
the historical.
All right, well,
trend.
our experience is arguably better, but yeah, 5.5 is probably a national number, so that includes. Okay.
So we're okay with Carrie's high end number of 7.5 as a high end.
okay, we're gonna stay with those. Retirement is just, we're funding this at a 5% annual increase, and across all scenarios, most likely lower retirement. Debt service, not sure what the difference between debt service and excluded debt. You just use debt schedules, is that for both excluded and for debt?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know why there's a percentage roughly. Well, that's because every year we schedule more debt within the levy limit.
Exactly.
Okay, very good.
And this assumes no new projects, is that correct?
It
No, we
assumes,
have a, go ahead. Karen.
it assumes no new exempt projects. So the capital budget that is approved each year that's within the levy limit is built into this, but no, there's no assumption for any additional excluded debt. No middle school, no, no, right.
Got it.
Okay, so Minuteman, pretty high trading range there, 690,000. Spoke Watertown, wants to join the consortium. Let's see, all those numbers. We're using debt schedules for excluded debt. That's the other, this is meaningless, this is all expenses, such a minor piece of the budget. It's not big. Okay, excise tax. Anybody have any argument there? 2 to 4% range of excise tax? Okay. License permits and fees, free cash. Now, free cash, we have got some accounts here because there's a budget article, and there will be in future years if this one passes, to raise free cash for affordable housing. And we want to say there's the lower end to free cash. It's not going to grow so much because it will be
Yes, yes.
so on the low. What?
It's not really free cash then.
Well, it's the proposal of Article 20.
And I think if that passes, I think you'll see other people wanting to get their nose into the trough as well.
I know, we're recommending no action on that article, but it could pass.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
So if it does, we won't have 1% available to us to bring back into our
we
budget.
might have a half. So what if we go on the low end at a 0.5%?
Yes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Still,
We should point that out.
I would keep it at 1%. Until an article passes, this has been the policy, this has been sort of a policy type thing in terms of how this was driven. Something that hasn't happened yet.
So if it passes, then next year.
Yes, we would be making a change next year in terms of how you build the model, whatever we're doing now.
all right, then we'll leave it. Fair enough, that's how we handle debt, which is a much bigger driver of this kind of problem than free cash
That's
issues.
right.
Pilot, 0% pilot, it's not going to change. They pay us a fixed amount every year.
It is based on sales, and the sales have actually gone down because of because of solar.
New growth. New growth, these are within the range of what we see. Projects on the horizon. So that's a pretty big range, 1 to 4% in state aid. Let's see, 5-year, 3.66% over the last 10 years. 6.25 over the last 5 years. Did we have a big year where we got a big bump somehow? Why do we have such a large 5-year average for state aid increases?
Isn't that the Baker administration increased state aid?
Well, I'm trying to remember 5 years now. We did have an increase. We have had an increase both in Chapter 70 and unrestricted that that I think could easily account for this. I mean, it's a small, it's not a lot of money, so.
It's not a big driver, it's just that the number doesn't comport with 3.66 over 10 years, 6.24 over 5, but we're going with 2.5 at a band of 1 to 4. It just seems none of the numbers are really in range in the history. That's all, that's what I'm using that question.
It's a reasonable question.
Okay.
Small.
We can, it's small potatoes, so we can leave it the way it is. I'm not going to. All right, now we're down to the 3 big series which are on page 1 that we've kind of danced around. How do you want to show these? These are the big items. Projected most likely for CPS at 44383838 seems really high to me.
So what we're doing here is we're looking back historically and using that as our only projection into the future.
Well, we're
right?
using it as an indicator so that we can make an educated guess based on trends, I guess, or based on.
So it's a trend analysis. So we're looking back 5 years and then just using the
5 and
slope
10,
of that
yeah,
to go
we're-
forward, right?
Yeah,
As opposed to adding any information that we might know throughout.
you know, it's an open process. This is just instructive to help us, to guide us, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the past is future. It's just.
It's almost like saying we're on an ocean liner, and if it keeps going the way it's going, right, this is where it's headed.
Is it going to hit a wall or an iceberg?
But it hasn't been a lot of variability, right? I mean, it does,
CPS, yeah, there has been.
has there?
There was a big increase like 2 years ago over supplies. It was like Diana's last year. It's like an 8%.
Okay,
So
so
it's reasonable, I mean, 4.2% 5-year trend is kind of reasonable to have things that are around that.
Yeah, so this looks right to me. 3.8.
You know, can I just back up for a minute? The purpose of this is for us to publish something that looks out 5 years and gives our best guess on what we think is most likely tax increases,
And
right?
it further takes into account the town's willingness to pay, because town meeting does vote for budgets. So, you know, it's also.
I just want to finish.
Oh,
Can I
so-
finish
I'm
what
sorry,
saying?
you're absolutely.
Yes. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, look out 5 years, what's the most likely increases? And then we refined it further by saying likely, and we added alternative scenarios, right? So it wasn't just most likely, but then we have 3 scenarios instead of just 1, right? And right now we're saying that that most likely scenario is basically looking at historical trends. Right, am I right so far? And we really haven't added much more information to change the slope of any of these lines. That's pretty much true, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Whatever is suggesting.
So then, that's what we're doing.
So are you suggesting that we should introduce elements that would change, that we think could
I think
most
earlier
likely
tonight,
that-
earlier
that-
tonight, there was a suggestion brought up, or I think June brought it up, or someone brought it up about how we should maybe be putting in here a sustainable growth rate, or a growth that the finance committee would recommend that we try to stay close to
But
for the
we're
next
gonna try
five
to do that for next
But we
year.
can't do that now because we're under a time constraint, right? So I think,
Wait, why can't we?
well, I thought Dean said that we couldn't go back and look at each one of these and put in a sustainable growth rate for each one of these categories.
I do
That's
think
what
that
we
we're
said.
somewhat time constrained, Tom. Where are we gonna have that
Yeah, I
conversation?
see.
And we're mixing
I
up
have a whole other meeting.
the sustainable growth rate conversation with this. So if we just try to keep this clean for this year, then I think we're done. And maybe what we should do is we should maybe go back and look at each of these, and if any one of us looks at this and says, you know, I don't agree that that trend line would result in this projection percent.
I think we have a serious chicken and egg problem here.
Yeah.
And I think that even though we all might like to deliberate about this for another 2 months before town meeting, I think we have to make some choices today that are going to affect both the sustainable growth rate and the most likely prediction, as far as, at least as far as the schools are concerned, and probably as far as the town entities are concerned as well. Personnel costs account for 75% of the total operating budget, and school operating costs account for 75% of that. To put a projection out there that is anything other than what we list as our sustainable growth rate why would we do that?
Well, we haven't got the
Just
town.
indicate where things
Because
are
it's
going.
not reality yet.
It's just an estimate of, if we keep going at this rate,
Yeah.
this is where we're going. It avoids the whole conversation about the sustainable growth rate, which is a separate conversation that we have to have this year, right, with the town. But for now, this particular exercise is dictated by the vote that Phoebe Ham took in, 2011. And we're looking at, if we continue on the path we're on now, this is where we're going. I thought it was as simple as that.
I don't think it's that simple.
Well, that's what it's written. That's how it's written.
That's what it is.
That's how it's written.
And I think that's a useful thing to do.
To just add a little, almost levity into the conversation, these projections are wildly inaccurate.
Yes, of course they are.
Okay?
Of course they are.
All right?
As all projections
Yeah.
are,
Of course they are.
particularly
I
about the
went back
future.
and looked at- I
We
went
should
back.
never have approved this article.
I went back and looked at history, and one of the things that we estimate is this chart that's usually embedded in this memo, which is the average tax bill. There's like a piece of the FinCom report that comes out, which is what's the average tax bill increase.
Yes.
These estimates are off, and I'll quote from 2014 to the 2018 finals, which when the numbers are in, like, you can then go back and see, well, how did we do?
Yep.
But on average, 23%, 42%, 64%, 87%.
Over or under?
80%, 82%.
Over or under?
Always over. In other words, we were estimating too low.
Right.
And these
Is that
numbers are
because, is that because CapEx is not included in there?
Doesn't include that.
No, it's just, we don't include excluded debt.
Right.
So these things happen.
Right.
We exclude some debt,
Right.
and then, there you go.
I-
So,
Yeah.
you know.
I think that's
so-
the biggest issue with the projection, is we know, we could put, I think it's a good idea to do this. I think it makes sense to show somebody, based on history, this is where we would project it to go. That makes sense to me as a taxpayer. I would like to see it. But knowing that I have, whatever it is, 100x million dollars on the docket here in CapEx, and that not being in there makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
So it's okay if you can say, this is what we think, but you'd also have a big red star going, P.S., this excludes what you're gonna vote on at town meeting, which will throw another X onto the tax bill. Yeah,
So this is not really a projection.
it's not complete.
Of what the tax.
It is not. It is not.
Excludes and we can
I think
also
when
say
we're
that we
facing
take a
such a
view,
large
right?
capital expenditure, we could publish this chart with two specific views. One is, it's like, if you don't vote for it, this is what we think.
Right.
If you do vote for it,
This is
this
what we
is what
think.
we think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that would be helpful in a year when there's a large, very
Right.
large thing on the table.
And there
This
is.
year, we have 1.5 million for feasibility,
But it does, in what you just said, though, wouldn't include the possible 90 million or the possible 55 million. So it would still way underestimate what.
It's
So
will-
pro forma, right? We can put whatever we want in as long as we tell somebody, this is what we've assumed. right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
always true.
It's not
Yes.
wrong, right? It's a
Yes.
pro
Yes.
forma.
Yeah.
So you can say, assume you build a middle school, assume you had, you can put it all in. You can show my line item, they could take it out themselves, right?
Did we do something like that for us?
Yes.
Debt service.
But that was just for debt service.
Yeah.
But
So-
could you marry those two together?
So we need to get off this particular topic. We should finish our agenda tonight. So the three things on page 1 are, I think, a little bit on the high side to sit on the town. I think it's a little on the high side. I'd much prefer to see the median number be closer to the 10-year projection than above the 5-year trend. So we have 4.0 plugged in as the most likely, and 3.99 as a 5-year and 3.69 as a 10-year, and we're projecting the most likely is above both of those numbers. So
And you think it should be more in line with the 5-year?
Or
I would
between.
probably be somewhere around 3.7.
So, yeah,
But that's just a suggestion. I'm happy to,
3.75 is
you know,
right in the
That
middle.
sounds good.
let's put it at 3.7 then.
It's
3.75.
I'm not, I just feel as though we're building in.
Well, 3.7 is a good number.
That's a little low, because it's, you want to be between 3.7 and 4.
But these are also wildly inaccurate.
They are, we're wildly inaccurate.
They're not wildly inaccurate, they're incomplete.
That-
Well, yeah,
Incomplete.
which makes them.
Incomplete is a good word. So Dean, did we just
All this
decide?
does is argue that we shouldn't spend too much more time on it.
So we just knocked off the town and we changed it from 4 to 3.7.
3.7, well,
And-
I suggested that, if you're happy with it.
I'm happy with that. Very happy with
I
that.
suggest
And you suggested on the
What do you
CPS,
like?
Phil's happy with that, so now we're all happy.
3.8, Phil likes 3.8.
So then we talked about CPS. You made the comment that you thought the
375, so
CPS serious.
375, we'll go with 375, we'll be sold.
Down? Okay.
And I like-
Dean, you made the comment that you thought the series on the bottom of CPS was high.
It just felt like,
It certainly feels too high to me, at least in the short term, maybe the first 2 or 3 years. Partly based on a number of things that I'm sure you all don't want to go into. So does it make sense to lower the next couple of years and because actually the way you have it is sort of the reverse of the way I envisioned it, but happy to be wrong.
just to be clear, this is the first time I've seen these numbers, so I'm not the master of this. I'm just trying to.
I mean, what if you put
herd these cats through it.
What if you put a 3 1/4 number in the first couple of slots rather than the 4 and the 3.8?
Yeah, I think that's too low, because we're trying to be realistic.
What number do you use?
Well,
Just a
but
3
we also
1/4.
have the school committee
that was just a
wanting
throw-out
FinCom
number.
providing a level of guidance that they have in their pocket when they're negotiating with the teachers. So,
So put the lower
we
end.
have really few,
So we're going most likely, why don't we just stay with the 10-year? There are all sorts of weird things that were happening over the last 5 years.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Including the double, the multiple dip, contract.
So I don't know if a qualitative explanation of what the yield, or my view of what this sort of what the scenario going forward over the next 4 or 5 years would be of any interest or not. Everyone obviously could have their own opinion, but the inflation rate peaked. I think the Social Security CPI for this year is based on the September number last year, which was 2.8. And currently, the CPI is running at just under 2%. Okay, so the trend that I would suggest is probably lower in the short term, followed by perhaps higher in the medium or longer term. And so that was the basis for in addition to things like new growth and what the housing market looks like and general sort of economic things that are happening, right? It seems to me that
if we need the schools to look at that their labor cost needs to grow with CPI. not as the COLA. That for the set of humans at their various steps and lanes, and they're moving through the steps and lanes, that in aggregate, how much that check for salaries needs to grow with CPI. And how they want to carve it up, steps, lanes, COLAs, their sphere of influence.
Agreed.
But in aggregate, there's no, because for a long time, I think there was a lack of complete clarity that when we were told the growth numbers, whatever, 2.2 or whatever, that was only the COLA, it wasn't what was really happening.
It was
in
COLA
aggregate.
plus,
Right.
that's plus wages,
Oh,
and it added
right.
up to like 4
But in
or
terms of like
5%.
holding them to, that this should all be growing with CPI, it should be growing with CPI because the student population isn't changing.
So turn that into proposing a number for the first three numbers in the CPS series.
I mean, maybe it
Currently we're
looks,
at
maybe it looks
4,
more
4,
like
3.8.
3%.
3%.
In terms of,
So-
meaningful, getting, like,
That would
rate.
be inclusive there, that's not just the COLA, that's, you're saying COLA plus
I
steps
really,
plus
I
like a
really
whole.
think that there
Yeah.
needs to be a new lens on talking about wages, whether it's CPS, the region, the town, in terms of in aggregate, assuming no change in population, no change in service level, and the growth in wages should be tracking
The CPI.
CPI.
Yeah. Agreed. So what, so
So then,
therefore,
right, so they're gonna get, in some ways, they get a boost this first year because they're gonna not have the double bump. And 90,000 for the math books, we're not paying that next year. So already we found some money, not a ton. But in general, like, in terms of trying to sharpen the focus around what it is we're communicating, that the number needs to be the number so everybody understands the pressure that the school committee and the superintendent are under in trying to come to the number. Right?
I think we all agree with that.
But I think,
But I think
yeah.
we need a number.
Okay, whatever. The
So-
numbers need to be lower. But again, we're not using this as a sustainable growth rate. This is the track that you are on. This is what we're saying. This is the track you're on. But the 10-year
We
trend
do get confused.
does seem to be, because the last 5 years, what it was, 2010, it was more than 5 years, but I know, like, when I came on in 2014, the year before had very, very low increase, and then that year, the schools came in with like 6% or something, huge increase.
I remember 1.8%, I thought.
Yeah.
And that they had a big.
So the 5-year thing
turnout.
has been, you know,
Yeah.
I think high. The 10-year, I think, is rational. And what we're doing, the only information we have is the history. Unless we know of some expenses or some savings in the future. We're not using this as an indicator of what we think it should be. It's what we see being.
Just one other
Right,
piece of
we're
information we
confusing
do have is this year's increase, which is what for the schools? Close to 4?
2.99.
2.19.
It's 2.99. Okay.
The CPS.
So that lowers it a little bit. So I'd say I agree with Carl that the 10-year is the best projection, but let's lower it a little bit. 3.6,
3.6.
3.5. Yeah.
3.5, I can still.
3.5. 3.5 it is.
Okay, so that's the, so for how many years are we gonna run 3.5?
Forever.
Forever?
Five.
For all 5? And then the low end becomes what, 3.25?
No, I think you can go bigger low end because that's the aspirational strategy that June is
Go to
talking
3?
about.
Yeah, 3.
Yes.
2.5 and 4.5.
3 so your 3 continuous. Your- Instead of 4.5, what do you think the high end is? 3.5. Like 4? 4.
Then you're not even within the 5-year trend.
You're lower than the 5-year trend.
It's 3, 3.5, and 4.
You think we got
What?
4.3?
We think this year was
What do you think the
reasonable.
high end, what if the high end is equal to the 5-year trend? 4.2.
Fine.
Okay? 4.2. Okay, one more, CCRSD, now they have their challenges with OPEB and their E&D, which is a continuous issue for them.
So it doesn't
Phil, would you
Doesn't
pull
make
that
s-
microphone
oh.
closer?
doesn't make sense to me that if the looking at the trends that we would have a 5% between 5 and 6% given the historical numbers, right? It seems to me it should be lower, or at least the alternate 1 and alternate 2 should be significantly lower, because our percentage of the district is going down.
There's a note in here that says that it's going up to 77% and then holding fairly constant through FY '20.
Oh, I see. That's 77% in FY '21. Oh, I see. Okay, hold on.
And we also have, we just went up almost 2% last fiscal year. So if you're looking at either the 5 or 10-year trend, it's
Low.
distorted.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so that's significant. We're going up to 77%. All right. Well, that does make sense. We're gonna be higher.
This is one of the most complex pieces of this model, frankly. You have to go collect these population variables from this NASDAQ organization and build them in and try to see how that's going to affect our share of the budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very difficult thing to do. What do we say about just leaving it the way it is, 5.5, 5, 6? Or is there some other?
I'd say lower the lower end to 4.5, and leave the top at 6, and peg the increase at 5.25.
Anybody else got it?
See that again, Phil?
It's 4.5 at the low end.
4.5 at the low end, 6 at the top end, and the most likely 5.25.
How did you pick the 5.5?
Yeah, right.
How did you pick the 5.5?
5.5 is the suggestion of, hold the page over, it says 5.5,
Yeah.
that's,
Did you pick that, or?
no, this is,
It's calculated.
this is it's somewhat calculated by, it's advised by the population shifts that go back and forth. It's just
Then I like the math. So I'd rather stay with the math than Phil's suggestion.
So
Yeah.
can I ask a question?
Let's just,
This is published.
this year they're getting by with 4, like, 4.4 something. Here it is. 4.44 per hour. But the previous year was 5.34. They had some
So
They had
there's
some
something-
issues with E&D, they still have issues with E&D.
Right, right.
It's
Right.
not going away.
Right.
So,
So stick with the numbers.
just stick with the numbers, 5.5, 5 and 6.
It's a point over this year.
So what's that?
5.5 is a point over this year.
But we have more, we
Sounds
have a
about
higher
right.
proportion of.
But it's on par with last year.
Well,
Um,
our share of the CCRSD budget's been out of whack for years, and one of the things I think we ought to push for, this is just a separate issue, but Carlisle's got to start paying their fair share, and they don't pay rent for the school buses or the Ripley building or any of the capital costs, and all the other things that were on that list that Chris put together. So I think there's ways that we can push to keep this down.
That could be worked into the sustainable growth that we were talking about for next year.
So I guess the piece that sort of slightly scares me in the narrative here is moving from 75.25 to 77%. That's a 1.75% change, which we know makes a huge swing in our assessment. So I guess I'm inclined to just stay with these numbers.
Yes.
Bill, I think you're not carrying the day.
That's fine.
We're not taking formal motions.
Right, that's fine. That's fine.
Still want to go over the warrant.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you're gonna get out of this. Do you did you get enough of that, Carrie, or do you need some?
No, I'm all set, and I will make sure to include the one table that is missing.
Right, there was a
tax.
table that shows the property tax bill for the average user, or the average person. Table. Okay. Alrighty.
Steve, when we show this in the report, do we include our assumptions, or is that?
No, this
silent?
whole, all of this,
All of this goes in.
I think, I'm trying to remember exactly how this has been
No.
done.
I don't remember seeing this
In the
myself.
past, we've handed this out at town meeting, I believe, or something. Somehow this memo is available to residents. I'm just trying to remember how this gets to residents, but
In
it
the
was on the
finance
table or
committee.
something.
Yeah,
It's in the finance committee.
It's in the
report.
finance committee report, mostly in the form of this model
Okay.
and of some other charts, this chart, and there's a table of average tax bill increases over, for the median household sort of thing.
So the assumptions are disclosed. That's really my question.
The assumptions, these underlying assumptions are not that clearly included in the finance committee report. I do believe this memo was issued as a separate standalone thing that you can pick up on the back table. So I'm not sure exactly how. So you have,
We can talk about that. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that our
Yeah.
assumptions are clear.
Yeah.
So
Okay, Chair.
Okay. Joie de vivre. Right, all right, so on to the review on our recommendations for the warrant articles. Where's the, well, Carl.
Mr. Chairman. I'm going to have to recuse from Article 22. And so I was wondering, in terms of the order, kind of, whenever, however far we get, that can be the last one.
Sure.
I don't know what your goal for getting through.
Sure.
So,
We
so,
can, I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll leave that to last.
Okay.
so and Tom,
All right, so we had deferred our recommendation and discussion on Article 6, the town budget. I think we might as well start there, unless anybody has a different concept they'd like to propose.
And that's at the guideline, right?
That is at the guideline, that's
yeah,
right.
so I,
What's, yeah.
Okay, so Carl is making a motion.
to approve. Yeah, can I just say, I thought the issue last time was, how are these new firemen going to be accounted for? And we've been back and forth on
We talked
that.
about that pretty extensively.
Earlier in the
Way back.
Right, that was the only issue. So
Yeah.
if that's
Right.
resolved, then
Yes.
we should move to approve.
Motion,
I'll move that we report in favor of.
affirmative action.
Yeah.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Okay. All right. Minuteman Regional Technical High School. Any?
I was gonna make a motion. but,
Please.
that Perhaps there's conversation.
We can discuss after you.
Okay, I move that the FinCom take a position of affirmative action on warrant article on the high school budget.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? That's more. Okay, the Concord Public Schools budget. I think we're agreed that we're going to take this up next week. So, sorry.
Oh, my God.
We love the discussion so far. It's all good.
Just checking.
Just wanted to see if Lori was awake. So, we have a motion.
I'll move that we take affirmative action, vote to take affirmative action on Article 11.
And a second,
I will second.
right?
So can somebody just clarify, did we already vote on the guideline?
Yes.
And we approved the increase in the guideline?
So, any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor? Okay, I think it was, any opposition? No. Oh, are you opposed? Okay.
And an abstain. Did you abstain?
Yeah.
Oh, we have an abstention.
Oh, and one abstention.
You asked this to Christine, she just was interested in how this appears in the finance committee report.
Is that mine? No.
Yeah. She's your finance.
Concord
It's
Public
yours.
Schools capital projects.
Which one is that?
We have.
That is Article 12.
Oh, it was 11. We just voted 11?
We did.
Right, 11.
Oh, I'm in favor of that. Never mind.
Yeah.
I thought we were doing the capital. I fell asleep.
Okay.
No.
The capital projects are,
John, you were still abstaining.
there's a couple of issues, but I would move to affirmative action. But the issues were, are we gonna,
Why don't we get a second, then we have a
Okay.
discussion?
We don't have a motion.
He said I moved.
yeah,
So I'll move
I move for
back.
affirmative
Okay,
action.
all right. And a second?
Also.
Okay.
Now, go ahead.
The issue is that there's a lot of money, like 2/3 or so of that money is for improvements at the middle school. So we're making these improvements at the middle school and then considering later, an article to replace the middle school. I think we should support this because I have a feeling that the middle school feasibility study is not going to get approved.
Phil, if you could speak right into
I'm sorry.
the microphone,
I support this because I don't think the middle school feasibility study is going to get approved. But either way, I think it's a worthwhile expenditure, including the expenditures for the middle school carpeting and painting. Like $600,000 or $700,000 of that money is for that.
And
So I have at least one comment on this. And that is, in general, I support this article. But I just want to say that we're being a little bit whipsawed, in my view, in that the schools are completely reconfiguring to a 6 and then 7-8 configuration, and there are capital expenditures associated with that activity. And at the same time, they're saying we want a new school. So we've had this 2-school configuration for 50 years, and right as we're asking for a new building, we're changing the configuration to 6, 7, 8, and we're asking for capital to do that. We're moving walls, we're changing rooms. It just seems like we're spending money to do something.
I joined Dean in being uncomfortable about those particular expenditures, especially in light of the fact that going back earlier in the fall, both in Chris's capital program and debt authorization plan and information provided by the schools, that they were looking at, targeting spending $450,000 on needed projects at Ripley. There were a bunch of other projects that have been taken off the docket in favor of making modifications to Sanborn so that we move to sixth grade and, put in a bunch of money to reconfigure the use of the buildings ahead of potentially tearing them down, as opposed to running as is for just a few more years and not deferring other major projects in other facilities.
So given that it's bundled together in one, large capital article, it's I would say, okay, because it's probably okay with it, because percentage of this that I need to know. Moving forward.
Do you know what that percentage is?
That's a good question. It's the kiln and the moving the wall and the science lab.
Which is that?
67K and 150K, so it's 217K. That's my number.
Less than 20%.
Just to comment, I also support approving this. I have a concern with this and following articles that the public that isn't sure what they're voting on with some of the language, I think some of it's not really clear what people are voting on. And that's just a concern as a citizen that I have.
Are you talking about this article or the feasibility study?
Both, but more the feasibility study, because I was totally off base with that. And I've since found out more about it. But I think in general, people are being asked, and I think this will go through, to make changes, make sense, the changes that are being proposed. But I'm not sure people fully understand what they're going to be voting for. And just a comment as a citizen.
Okay. Any other?
Do you have any, having studied it a little bit, have you clarified for yourself what you would be voting for? I know you're saying that citizens may be confused or may not know. Do you now know what you would be voting for?
I have a better idea because I'm here hearing discussions, and the average person out there is not hearing it. And also in plain English, not just finance speak, which a lot of us don't really understand that well. So it's just a concern that I've had.
Do you have a recommendation?
Or how to make it, now that you understand it better, how would you suggest that it be done?
I can't write the article.
Well, were you at the public hearing last week? Because Lori had a slide on these,
Yeah.
on these.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be the same presentation at town meeting. So if people just go through the slide, they'll have an idea.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I don't know if you want me to talk now, but those slides are evolving because we're getting some of that feedback, and some of that I was going to talk on when we got to the feasibility middle school article. We're definitely hearing the questions and responding to them. We've been in touch with Carmen, who's offered suggestions for language. We're working on that with Bond Council. The Concord committee's going to talk about that on Tuesday night when they meet, about whether we need to tweak the language and crystallize clarity. So we're responding to that. There's all effort here to make sure people understand what they're voting on. In terms of this money, just to answer the reconfiguration question, we're just trying to do better with what we have. We have a lot of challenges right now with the way that we've got kids split across the two schools, and we don't have horizontal alignment across grade levels, so we're just trying to do better by that. We think it's worth the better 4 years or 5 years or whatever it turns out to be that we're in there to make positive change like that. What we know though is we haven't fixed all our issues. We've added a transition, and that's not best educationally. So we're minimizing the negatives we have now, but we're certainly not eliminating all of them, which we believe that's the one school new build answer. But to us, this is trying to do better by the kids that are serviced in that school for the next number of years, which they'll never benefit from whatever we all decide to do long term.
It's understood, but down the road a bit, I would hate to see people say, well, I didn't realize that this was what I was voting for, or I didn't understand.
We agree. We're trying to
I think
clarify, which is why I think these slides won't be exactly the same. Some will look similar, but there's going to be definite adjustments to make sure we're very clear about what we're suggesting.
Okay. So Phil has a motion on the table for affirmative action on this article, and it's seconded by Carl. So is there any more discussion?
Can I have one more comment on Ripley while I'm talking?
Please.
We deferred Ripley because we're working right now with Kate Hanley to see what green grants we might find, because a lot of it is boilers and things like that. So we purposely held off a year on not bringing any Ripley items. It's in the capital plan for the next coming years, hoping we can pull some stuff out because we have other ways to fund it. So that was intentional.
How bad are your boilers?
Ripley, we've got one 1974 and an original in the 50s.
Does that one take coal?
I'm just glad it's on every morning right now.
The reason I ask is because there are some beautiful boilers at Sandy Point. They do get pulled out for 4 years.
That's a thought we hadn't had. We'll put that on the list.
I think we're ready for a vote on this. All in favor of this motion? All opposed? Abstentions? Okay. It's all in favor except one abstention. Right, Article 13.
No, we don't.
Hear about?
No.
Well,
actually,
yes,
It has to do with money, but I think it's.
I move to recommend affirmative action on this, but the money aspect of it is that,
Your second call.
okay, yeah, sorry. The money aspect of it is that the money right now goes into the town budget, and this is going to divert it to the school budget. But it's money that the schools generate.
Right.
The school buildings and the land they sit on are actually assets of the town that are used during the day for the education of the students. If they're used for other purposes, then I would suggest that matching the assets and the revenue that is generated from their use for anything other than school is actually probably more appropriate match to the owner of said properties, which is the town. And while the dollars are really tiny, I think that promoting a broad understanding that the buildings and the land are the property and the responsibility of the town is appropriate, and that, at some level I'm calling over, I would, but I do think that clarification needs to be made, and that the reason that it probably is written the way it is written is that the assets really are the assets of the town.
And these charges are separate and distinct from any maintenance fees for use of these facilities. Is that not correct?
So when people rent the space, they pay a custodial fee that directly goes to the custodial costs, so the town doesn't have that in the general fund, but this is going to the general fund. Our wish would be to use this to help maintain the space that's being used. For example, redoing gym floors and things like that, so that it goes right back to the common space that the community's using. So
So
that's-
Lori, does that mean that you wouldn't be coming back to the town for an appropriation to do that at some point?
It could if we let $15,000 add up enough over the years to do that, yeah.
But the
That-
appropriation would be coming out of that fund.
It would come out of that fund. That's right.
Oh, so those funds,
So we're trying to build a revolving account, so the money can go in there, and then we can put it against whatever we need to do in the space that's being used by the community. So the gym floors is always the first discussion point, that we would then be able to do that without needing to use operating or otherwise.
This is really just taking money from one pocket and putting it in another.
Yes.
okay.
Doesn't mean June's wrong,
So,
not at all.
just to
Painful.
clarify something in my mind, you said that the assets are the assets of the town.
Yep.
I do think that the property, the land, is actually controlled by the school committee, and they are able to discharge it, like they can surplus the land that Peabody sits on and give it back to the town. So
Well, the
there's
schools
some.
are really, they're really.
Am I missing something,
they're
Laura? I
department
thought
of
that
the
that's
town.
been stated, that you would
That is-
surplus Peabody when they're done.
Right now,
with
they're
it.
under the jurisdiction of the committee, which we would surplus.
Perhaps the audience member on the assessors, do you know if the real estate is the town's or the schools?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's the town.
Yeah, so the land is really, that's the town's.
So so this idea that Peabody would be surplus somehow back to the town is
No,
not.
that's a
not a thing.
misstatement.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, it's not a thing. All right, so we have to just be careful with it.
Yeah, and
Okay,
it raises a broader question of, not all communities have responsibility for the maintenance of the schools as handled by the schools. Some places the town handles, especially when it's paid off. So different people handle it differently. And it's not a big moneymaker, but the property isn't the schools.
Okay.
Okay, we'll stop.
So,
This is an academic
It's
point.
fine,
We don't need to
it's
discuss it.
All right, I think we're ready for a vote. All in favor?
Oh,
Opposed? 3 in opposition. Any abstentions? No. Okay. Article 14, Concord Middle School feasibility study.
So Tom, did you circulate, I don't think you did,
Yes, it's in the packet.
the stuff from, no, not Miguel's. Miguel's is one, but Carrie and I were going back and forth for the last week on this debt burden question, and she produced some really useful charts. And if people haven't seen that, I really don't think we should have this discussion. Did you see, I did a summary of it this afternoon.
I read it, and I'm sorry to say, I really don't see, I still don't see its relevance, but if you'd like to explain it.
Well, I think people have to see it, but the bottom line is that we already have a tremendous amount of debt that we're paying for the schools in relative to our peer communities and just in general, adding to the tax burden. But I asked Carrie to prepare some charts explaining that, and this would more than double our school debt and put us more than double any other town, the amount of debt. And that includes the towns like Wellesley, which is twice the size of Concord. And Wellesley just built a brand new high school. So I just think people ought to look at that and understand the effect of the proposed debt burden before we start talking about the possibility of building a middle school without MSBA assistance. And I think the charts that Carrie prepared are really eye-opening. So I'd move that we table this until everybody has a chance to read them.
Are they much different than the charts we've already seen?
We saw some, right?
Remember the charts that you,
no, this is,
There's
Is
more
this the
detail.
one you're talking about? It's just like a little columnar
But
thing
is
with
the
the
bottom,
different
is
towns?
the bottom line the same?
Yeah, but there's multiple pages, like multiple parts of that spreadsheet. That's one.
Yep, that's it.
No, there's many more. The
That's fine.
other, she sent around about 6 different spreadsheets that has data on
I
the debt
only
burden.
looked at the last one that came today.
No, the other ones came last week.
So,
I have copies. I'm not gonna get in the middle of this, but I have copies.
I think people should look at it. So I guess I moved we postpone discussion until people have a chance to digest that information I propose they see. I think I printed out 1 copy.
Is that something we would do just before the Monday public hearing? Just discuss it, postpone it until Monday?
We need
Phil?
to find
I think we
an
need-
opportunity to have discussion. You can't just have, like, leave 5 minutes at the end of the hearing.
We have a meeting next Thursday,
That,
regular meeting.
Yeah, I'm saying we postpone it till the regular meeting next Thursday.
I guess
Well-
I'm wondering, is there any new information, though, that we haven't already seen from the charts that?
Yes, yes.
Is it
So
more
I've
detailed,
got-
or is
these
the
are
bottom
This is
line-
the stack.
it's comparative across numerous towns, so, you know,
do you have the copies with you?
She's also prepared all of the school borrowing since, this one, 2003, all the borrowing by the entire town since 1992. Another chart on that same figure. And then another chart on town borrowing from 2003.
You know, Phil, I can't hear a darn thing you're saying.
Okay. She's got 5 or 6 other charts that summarize borrowing either on behalf of the schools or on behalf of the town going back to 1992. Some of which,
I didn't print all those sheets.
okay. But I think you could, I mean, they could easily be circulated because it's just 2 Excel documents that people could look at.
So, Phil, I get, what's the point you want to make? What is the?
The amount of debt we already have, the amount of school debt we already have, and the fact that we would be more than doubling it, and more than doubling any other towns, what any other town is
All
paying.
right, so if we take that as a given, then what? How do we act?
Maybe
in
not,
response to
maybe
that?
not. I think that if people just want to accept that, that's fine, I guess. I think unless there's an urgency, why can't we do it next week when people have had a chance to read it?
Yeah, I suppose we just, we would have a TBD in that line in the FinCom report. Or I suppose, if we decide,
Oh, so we have a
We can-
deadline for the
no.
FinCom report.
We can make a decision. It goes in on the 18th, but we can make a decision on the 11th or whatever.
sure,
Or the 14th.
14th.
14th,
which is our next
14th, I think.
real meeting.
You're cutting.
Okay, so,
Or we could say in the FinCom report that we'll make our decision.
yes, we can do that also.
We'll
Yes,
announce
right,
it town
okay.
meeting.
So we're deferring this.
Well, that,
That was my motion.
Okay. So, was there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Did anybody count?
What about you?
That was abstaining.
So no objection to no motion, the motion carries.
Okay.
So Carrie,
Right.
Tom, can I just ask one other thing? Can we have Carrie circulate both of the documents she prepared? She had one last week and one today, or yesterday. So there are 2 Excel documents, and one of them has multiple tabs in it.
Is that the one that has, that's mostly our town's different, debt?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that just shows, was that just circulated to you and me, Tom? I'm not sure.
So this is benchmarking? Or
This
It's,
one is
it's both
benchmarking.
benchmarking and just showing the town how much we've already borrowed.
Well, but so the benchmarking really is only absolute debt amounts for peer group towns.
Yeah,
Is that
so
correct?
Yeah,
It's
I
not
ex-
things like debt service per capita.
I
or per
extended to create that number. Would you like to know how they
I
rank
would
with that
love to.
number?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we rank number 3, just like we do in total debt.
everything else?
And the number 1 is Lincoln, which is a pretty small population and is rebuilding their 2 schools. They have a K-5 and a 6, they have a K-4 and a 5-8. They have 2 buildings and they're reconstructing them and building 29 modulars and spending $90 million, of which they've issued a ton of debt. So Lincoln is a small town building, really reconstructing their elementary schools, and has spent a ton of money already, $76 million. So that's why they're number 1 at $12,000 of debt per capita. Second is Carlisle, who are participating in our high school, and we're third,
Out of
So-
how many?
out of whatever this list
yeah.
is.
Lincoln just voted, Lincoln just voted to put in $80 million, to borrow $80 million for their school building project, I think in January or December. And I could go on and on about Lincoln, but Lincoln has a history of financial problems. And about 15 years ago, I believe their school administration was pushed out because of the mismanagement. So there hasn't been anything in Lincoln for a while, but they just issued $80 million in debt. That's why they've jumped up so high.
Right. It's kind of an exceptional case, but it's a small town that's rebuilding there.
So what year is this for, Dean?
What's that?
What year is this for?
This is current.
Current.
This is our current outstanding debt per capita.
So is your point that we're starting from a very high level? and-
We're already at number 3, and it just goes up from there when we issue more debt.
Yeah, if we double our debt or more than double it, we will certainly be number 1. Yeah.
Well, we'll
Per-
be number
per
1 in
capita.
total debt, but we will not eclipse Lincoln by a long shot. We will probably go to number 2 on the list. In per capita. Per capita.
Oh, yeah, that's understandable.
Okay. Article 15. I'll entertain a motion.
I move to have the Finance Committee vote in favor of the Concord Carlisle Regional High School budget.
Affirmative action.
Second.
Second. All right.
Affirmative action.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Okay. Article 16, CCRSD capital projects.
All right, so Tom, I have a motion on this. I would move that we approve affirmative action, but not in the amount of 2 million, but the amount of 1 million. Because as I do know a little bit about cost of building roads, and I think they're about twice as much as they should be, and the same with the parking lot. And
But Phil, wasn't this supposed to be the worst case scenario? And they expect to spend less.
yes, but I also don't want to get into a situation where we allocate this money and then the money is, they spend $1 million on the road and the parking lot, then they allocate the other $1 million for some more concrete signs.
I don't think, I think we have to show good faith and trust that if they can pay, if they can have the work done for less than 2 million, they will.
And I think Lori had said just that.
Right. This is, we're not managing down to the nickel in their budget. What's in front of us now is, do we think we should appropriate what they're saying is the high number for 2 projects? I think that's what's in front of us now.
I agree with Phil. I think the number is too high. They've told us it's too high. I agree with your proposal.
I've just seen too many times that I absolutely agree that Lori and Jared and the current administration has been very transparent, but I've seen so many times the schools stand up and say, hey, once you give us that money, especially the regional district, that's our money. And
So what happens if
Well,
they get, part of the way through and, whatever. Hazardous waste, just, or whatever, the cost.
come back and
for it.
ask.
Come
that's
back, so
why,
that would
that's
basically
why,
take a whole nother,
Yeah, but you don't budget
Building.
for every contingency,
Hmm?
right? You budget a reasonable number, so I
So-
don't.
no, they don't want to have to come back. So the
That's
reason,
okay, come back. I think two times is too high, so I think it's too high.
what I would like to see, I'll add another level of complexity here, is these two things decoupled from each other. And look at one as the road and one as the parking. And I believe that there will be a motion on the floor to do just that. So,
They did say at our meeting when we discussed it, they were considering doing that or giving us numbers. But I'm saying basically whatever that is, it's about twice as much as it should be.
okay, I'm talking about something else, but I'll wait.
Separate. I understand. Separate the school parking lot and the road. And I thought Lori said she would consider that,
No.
or somebody did.
No,
No, it has to be an amendment from the floor.
It had to be amended, but the school committee debated that issue, and they decided that they wanted it together, so that's their position, and if somebody decides to try to separate it from the floor, that would be
I
the
see,
town
okay,
meeting's
okay.
will.
Right, that's the process. And
Right.
that,
Well, that also tells me that the schools are trying to keep the money together in order to, have their own independence on how to spend it. So,
Well, no, Lori, I'm going to make one comment before that. They're hoping that they can get some economies of scale by letting one contract and therefore not having double costs for ramp up and, all their initiation costs and stuff like the insurance. So to have it as two separate, completely distinct projects would be inefficient, and that's one of the,
Dr. Hunter?
my override is that.
Yeah, no, that was one point I certainly was gonna make. The rationale to put them together was economy of scale. It is the, most conservative number, and by that we mean trying to be sure we can account for any contingencies. We just paid the $50,000 to an engineering firm to give you the best number that we possibly could. It's a solid number, knowing there's a lot of complexities to that campus with the drainage and the public water supply, and we need to know we can do that right. We have every, Phil, to your point, it's illegal for us to do anything but what's in the article. Both, our commitment to both communities is bound by what is voted on at town meeting. So we need to go out to bid for these two projects, get those bids, fund that, and that is all we can do. If it's less, we're not gonna get 2 million and then have the rest stashed away. We're gonna bid what we need
So-
and only spend
but there
that.
is history of that.
And
So-
history's history.
I know, but
Hopefully we can go forward.
But so there was money committed to a technology stabilization fund, and we ended up building 2 concrete signs for $150,000.
So I can't speak to that. All I know is we're legally bound to
So
only
that's just
only
one
do what's
example.
here.
There are
I
just
know.
many
I just
examples
want to be
over the
sure I'm
last 10
clear that
years.
we're legally bound to stick within the
So I'm
parameters.
sure you're pretty sure they're legally bound to not build those signs either. But
So you just said something about it, putting them out for bid?
why do those things come up all the time?
Any further discussion?
Putting them,
Yeah.
Andrew's
Andrea.
asking about the bids. Yeah.
I think Dr. Hunter just said something about putting it out for bid. So where did the number come from?
So we just did a
If they have-
$50,000 study with Gale Engineering, who came and surveyed the entire site and the scope of work that needed to be done to give us the best number possible conceptually to bring to all of you. So that's where that number came from. They did not do the actual design work, which is what we would need the bid for, to then go out to a contractor and ask them to actually do the work. So the next layer includes design work, where they flesh it out in further detail. We had a lot of concerns about bringing you a number that was off. That's why we did that whole, you've been through this saga with us of how we funded that ourselves to make sure we were comfortable with what we brought. We think it is high, but we can't get that consolidated based on the professional advice we just got without the next round of work to be done.
I have to ask a question, just as a member of the Finance Committee, my role as a member of the Finance Committee. Am I supposed to be voting here how I would vote on at town meeting, or or how I think the finance, I mean, I'm a little bit
We're
confused. Should I,
advising town meeting.
I understand that, so
So-
do I just,
How do you want to advise town meeting? That's what you should vote.
okay.
Are you clear?
Yeah, I think so.
Are we ready for a vote?
Is there a
Okay.
motion?
All in favor?
I'm sorry, what's the motion?
Okay, the motion is affirmative action
On Article 16.
on Article 16.
I think the motion on the table is.
Yeah, my motion was to-
By half.
Oh,
And-
oh, I'm terribly sorry.
I don't think
Thank you
we
for
have a
pointing that
second.
out.
But
Okay.
I can withdraw that if
No,
somebody wants to.
no,
move.
through it. I'll second it.
All right.
So, Phil, then yours would be half to be used on the two projects, not half because you have a concern about.
Yeah, no, half would be for both projects, yeah.
So you're okay with both, but they should cost less, okay.
Yeah.
All right,
So
so.
I
no
wouldn't
further
support an
discussion on
affirmative
that.
action at 2 million.
All in favor of that motion? 2 in favor, all
I
opposed?
think it was 3.
Abstentions? 1 abstention. Right, that fails. Okay, I will entertain a motion on Article 16.
I move affirmative act that we vote for affirmative action on Article 16.
Second?
I will second.
Any discussion? See none. All in favor? Oh, was that
You can carry it.
all opposed? Oh, all right. So this means,
Just fails, so we are voting no, that just failed. We have no separate motion for no action.
okay. So,
I move that we recommend no action on Article 16.
is there a second?
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Well, I have some discussion. I think, I'm definitely not in favor of it. I think it borders on being absurd, with all due respect. But, we know these things need to be done. We have an undertaking from the superintendent that if costs come in below the 2 million, that those funds will return to the town. That seems like a pretty reasonable approach to these two projects.
So, Tom, I voted no for a different reason, which is I support the resurfacing and handling of the access road. I do not support creating an additional parking lot for a variety of reasons. One, it doesn't really solve the problem. We're still going to have people who are disappointed that they do not have a parking spot. And so the problem of having to manage kids who are upset because their parking spot has been swiped, or dealing with providing guidance to those who do the swiping isn't going away. And I did a spot check this week. 40 cars were parked on Laurel. In the non-Doug Whitefield spots, 43 were open, and 19 were open up on the Doug Whitefield. So there's not, and that was at 9:45 in the morning. So I allowed for everybody who needed to be in by B block to be there. And so the kids, on that, it's not every day, but it's not a consistent problem. And I think that when we started the school year, every senior who wanted a spot had a spot. And then as the year unfolded and more juniors wanted to drive or whatever, that then we had students who were choosing to take spots that were not assigned to them, whether they were a senior who didn't have a spot, a junior who didn't have a spot, a sophomore who didn't have a spot. And that the issue that we really have, which makes me very sad, is that we have students who take spots that aren't theirs, and we have students who are showing up, and before their school day has even started, they're on their last nerve, and their response to finding out that their spot is obstructed is that they're in the office crying. And that as a community, the adults haven't provided a procedure for a student who finds their spot to be blocked to come in and get adult support on how to handle it for that day, aside from taking someone else's spot. Off the top of my head, you could pull up, put your blinkers on, run into the office, give your name and your spot number. The office could call down to Beatty and you could be green lighted that you could put your car in Beatty for the day. And Officer Scott, who's there basically full time, could deal with what car is sitting in spot 122 without that daisy chain of cars doing that. We heard as an observer at the last regional meeting that a group of students had programmed an app that would facilitate kids finding carpools. There was a decision not to roll that out. There was a recent meeting with, a green initiative that the students thought that perhaps spots could be allocated by day because not everybody needed it. The kids themselves were capable of generating solutions to the problem. We haven't given them a chance to figure it out. And that I would rather that we put $1 million into helping their social and emotional development so that they weren't swiping spots or being that frustrated that they were crying before their day started, and that we got at the root problem. The root problem isn't going to be solved by a parking lot, and it doesn't even provide enough spots for the alleged demand that we've heard about that, by Bright's school committee and the superintendent have told us that this doesn't really solve the full demand. And then just a spot check, 43 open spots in the number of spots that were not dug white. So I 100% support getting the ring road fixed, or the access road, but I had also checked many surrounding communities, and we have plenty of communities nearby that say that parking is just a senior privilege. And we can accommodate that without putting money into expanding paved surfaces. Much like we acted on water bottles, much like we acted on bags in the grocery store, that one way to push for the climate respect and changes in behaviors is to not facilitate the bringing of more cars. We already provide everybody a free ride to school, back and forth to school, and families and kids are going to have to get creative. And I really do think that we have really talented kids who could figure this out themselves if they were actually empowered to do it. And so my vote isn't about the worry about the misuse of the money. It's really about the philosophical concern that we're not really addressing the right problem.
Very well said.
So we have a motion and a second on the table, right, for no action on this warrant article. Is that right? Is that where we are?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Ready for a vote? All in favor?
Of no action.
All opposed? Abstentions? Okay, no action.
I think we voted on the one that's towards the end.
Which?
Yeah, we voted on a lot of the ones at the end.
So we have to wait for the enterprise budget ones.
Um,
18.
No, we did not.
Thank you, have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Sorry to miss the rest.
Oh, gee.
No, you're not.
Just watch us on television.
Yeah.
Can I move that we recommend affirmative action on Article 18? And just, I realize there's a lot of details to be ironed out about the presentation that we'll make, but we did already vote to proceed with this when we decided to put the article in the first place, and all we're really doing now is to support that previous decision.
I wasn't here for that discussion, so, but I'll wait and we'll have the discussion after you second the motion.
It's been second, Carl second.
Okay.
Floor, you have the floor.
I wasn't here when we voted for this, but I have serious concerns about it, both in response to what I heard at the hearings and in response to comments that I'm hearing from my neighbors. And I'll begin by saying that I think the goals of this are honorable. In other words, we're trying to tell people stop spending. Okay, we've got to keep spending within a reasonable range. But I really believe that there's confusion about the method we're using that I think is distorting the message that we're trying to get out there. And the method we're using, which is a change to the bylaw, when I read the bylaw, it seems like this is definitely the wrong mechanism to be changing for this type of a proposal. The bylaw is a one-page document that was written in 1921 that basically just dictates of how the finance committee would be set up and, you know, generally what our duties would be. More appropriate would be something that we had put in front of us at the special town meeting, or at the special town meeting, actually, by Phoebe Ham, which is what initiated the 5-year projection. So I'm concerned with the method we're using, a bylaw change versus another method. And the other thing I think of is that we're going to have a lot of debate about the sustainable growth rate, which might derail our main point, which is to keep spending in line. And I'm worried that if this passes, it's an advisory only. It really doesn't have any teeth. But if it fails, I think it's something that the Finance Committee will have to recover from. As it will not be. It would be hard to be on the Finance Committee after that if it fails, because I think it would. People think that this. I've heard people think that this is a power play on the part of the Finance Committee, and I don't think that's what it is. I think it's not ready for prime time, and
What would be your suggestion?
I think that it needs more work and more thought.
So withdraw it?
So I've heard people say that, we don't really need a warrant article to achieve this objective, and that you as chair can decide that this committee should do that
Well, we've already voted to do that.
in the first place.
So I think that the point of us going forward with this request of town meeting is that it binds over future chairs to continuing this behavior, and that there is something valuable about that, because it might be the interest of one particular set of 15 members that we produce such a thing, and then somebody else says, well, nobody really pays attention to that anyway, and it takes us a lot of debate and time to figure it out, and it's just shelfware, as they say, so let's not bother. And it would stop. So this has a durability to it that I think has value. But to Mary's point, I think that we could back off the demand for a bylaw amendment to the kind of votes that, right now, the guideline was created by that type of vote,
Right.
as was the 5-year tax projection. That's all that there is to force us to do these procedures each year.
Which is a town, the 5-year tax projection was a town meeting vote.
It was a town meeting vote, as was the guideline.
It
The
was a
guideline is
special-
just a simple change vote.
It was a special town meeting vote, but it wasn't a bylaw change.
Yes, it was. So,
No, it wasn't.
well, I'm reading what this is this is a bylaw change to section 4 of the Finance Committee bylaw, which now has the 5-year tax burden in it. So Phoebe's,
That's
Huh?
proposed.
That's proposed.
Just proposed.
So we're proposing,
Not the
we're proposing a
existing
new,
bylaw.
we're proposing a new section 4.
oh, I see,
Which is
okay.
these two things. Which adds that because it had historically not been put in the bylaw.
Can I just
And
ask
it
a
could
question?
be,
Yeah, go ahead.
Do we need town meeting vote to establish policies? Add them to the list of policies and whatever that,
No, policies are are done, but you don't have,
But they're written, I mean, they're,
they're written, but I'm not sure what set of policies. I mean, the finance committee doesn't have policies. The select board has policies and there are administrative policies, but
But we have an administrative code, is that correct? Never mind, I should have brought that up.
What establishes,
That's a-
what establishes the rules for the guidelines? Like, is that was that a town meeting vote, or?
okay, yes.
Yes, that was an article, that was a 1976 town meeting
76.
article.
Oh, okay. Well,
The 5-year was a 2011 special town meeting article. So articles have been used very effectively to, initiate.
Require us to do
behavior,
things, yeah.
initiate
Require us to do
behavior.
things.
It
so
So-
we could do without making part of
bylaw.
the finance committee bylaw.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's my
So that's the way we could back off, not get into a whole debate about, how important and critical it is to maintain the 1921 document.
Okay, so then, but how do we, then what do we do about the big debate we'll get into as far as what is the sustainable?
can we amend this to remove the bylaw requirement, become more parallel with the Phoebe Ham article?
Sure. Why don't you
Absolutely.
comment on
I
that?
spoke to the moderator, and she said that was permissible.
So our
So-
motion could be different from.
All right, so I modify my motion that we amend the article to remove the bylaw requirement and support affirmative action on the amended article, or the amended motion. So it just is a town meeting article requiring us to do this, a la Phoebe Ham.
So,
Yeah.
I'm not going to second that yet. So I wanted to follow up on Mary's other point, which is, are we ready for this discussion, whether it's a bylaw change or it's an article? I don't know that we are.
Right.
So we have to be, right? So we heard it at the hearing, right? What are you talking about? This is too vague. So I don't know how much time we have, but we've got to be ready. And if we're not going to be ready, we can't go with
I
it.
agree.
We got to have a number.
I agree.
And you have to have an example. So I feel like we're dancing around that, but the time is running out to dance around it. We have to have our answer. We have to know if we're in agreement on what our answer is. But what does this really mean? What's it mean in reality for 2020 or 2021, whatever the year is that's going to be up
And we have to have a number that's defensible, that
Yes,
we
we
can
do.
make simple enough that people will understand it and that they'll agree to it. And
I don't think we can go with a
And
fear.
I think that's a lot of work to do between now and town meeting.
I think
I
we
think so.
spent a
I
lot of
don't-
time on this,
Where's our-
and I
where's our number?
disagree.
Where's our number, though? Where-
We actually voted we voted a way of calculating it, so a number is, you could pull it out, because we voted on the calculation itself.
Okay,
which was
I'm
a-
sorry,
which
I
was
wasn't
an
there, so what is it?
arithmetic average of the 10-year treasury bill and the CPI, and that was it.
Okay.
So, just whatever that number is on the
Well, we
day of
had
town
that
meeting,
number
that's the
a few
number.
months ago.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was,
but
it was
that's
something
what we
less than
voted, so
3%.
well, let's not relitigate something that we've spent a
Well,
lot of
no,
time
I'm
on.
just asking, because I wasn't there.
It's
So
not
I
anything.
think, what is this number? And can- is
Well, I
this-
think, Mary's point though is, and I think, that other people have said, is we could do this without the town meeting bylaw. Okay, but the town meeting bylaw does give it more emphasis and guarantee that it's ongoing.
Or a standing vote from town meeting, and instead of a bylaw amendment. Are you fixing?
No, here's what I'm
Okay.
getting at is, perhaps what we should just do is go ahead and do this for a year or so, a couple of years, okay? So people, and we're doing that, okay, look, we've been doing this, presumably enough people will know we're doing that, and we haven't, caused the sky to fall or anything like that, and then bring it perhaps to town meeting in a couple of years. When people are used to it. That's not so spooky. That's my suggestion.
I'm not sure people are going to get used to what we've discuss.
Well, maybe they won't.
Here.
We can, we
There's
know
not
we can
enough
go ahead
knowledge.
doing that. We've already, so.
So do you remember what the number was, Dean? I assume it's south of 4. Right. So it's a
2.9.
low number, or lower number.
Yeah, it's a lower
It's-
number.
Right, so,
It's
so
actually-
are we gonna say the number at town meeting, or are we gonna make pretend we don't know what it
You're
is?
gonna be asked.
You
And I
have,
think
we
we're gonna-
absolutely
yeah.
are.
And we should be ready to say, we discussed the following methodology.
Right.
And if that methodology is what we decide to vote on at our next FinCom, during our next FinCom cycle, this would be what the number is. I don't think that's a terrible statement to make. It doesn't say this is the number, you guys have to stay with that.
Right.
We
Right.
discussed this
Yeah.
extensively, came to a vote of this
Right.
calculation, and this would be the number that it would be if that were.
So that's all terrific, Dean, but none of that's in the warrant.
But that's okay,
So
that's
we need-
part of the.
So that's what we need to do.
Yeah, that's all we need to do
So-
is present it at town meeting.
So before I vote, let me make sure I understand. So we're going in front of town meeting, and we're saying that we want to have a motion. We're changing this motion so that instead of bylaw change, it would be a simple motion where the finance committee would publish in the FinCom report a sustainable growth rate, calculate, and then we'd wait for the question and say, this is how we would calculate it. Is that?
That we,
So it's not
we
binding.
haven't been empowered to do this yet. We debated extensively.
You don't need to be empowered.
You don't need to be
Okay,
empowered.
so we haven't, okay, we've not,
So that's, well, that raises a whole other issue. If it were to be defeated, then
It's like-
could we still do it?
Yeah, sure.
Right? Because we don't really need approval to do it, but if it's defeated, can we not do it?
Why are we asking permission to do something that we can do, and what if they say no?
we're telling town meeting that this is a valuable
We're not telling,
exercise.
we're asking, it's a
No,
motion.
we're telling them this is a valuable exercise and that we think that it belongs in the permanent regimen of this committee.
But-
That's what we're telling them.
But we're not telling them, we're
We
asking
can't
them
make
to
it
vote
permanent,
on
they
something.
can't.
I think we need a little more specificity, though. For example, like, at what point would we use the 10-year rate? And which inflation rate, as of when, and would it be prospective or historic?
That was all spelled out. That was all
We
spelled
already
out
had that,
in
and-
a motion.
It's not in the warrant article.
Yeah, maybe
It's not what I'm looking at.
No.
So we need to put it all
They're not
down.
voting
No.
on the rate.
We're
They're
gonna,
voting on having us produce one.
But they'll,
Yeah.
they'll
So they how?
In a motion, it's like.
They're gonna ask how.
wanna know.
And they're gonna say, what would it have been? And what do you think it would be? And how did you get there? And can you justify the methodology?
So my answer.
So I agree, I'm agreeing with you. And I'm saying all this.
So my
but-
answer to all this is that the precise number is not nearly as important as the exercise that we will go through. And it is not nearly as important as the result, which is to focus the attention of the budgeting entities on a particular sequence of numbers.
See, I agree with that, and I think that's very important.
Yes.
But don't we
So-
already have that with the guideline process?
No,
No.
Why
no,
not?
because that's a one-year process.
1 year.
They come in and say, this is what we want this year.
So
We're
this
trying to
would
say,
be a
this is
5-year
what we
guideline?
want you to be
Yes.
using as a planning metric. A planning metric.
and I think that the number can, or the calculation can vary. Another finance committee might say, 10 years from now, the CPI is not a good way of doing this.
Exactly.
We're going to measure it based on the
Well, this doesn't fix
Google's, Google's.
It doesn't bind us.
That's true,
Interest
but
rate.
you could present it as an example of what the
Yes.
thought process
Exactly.
is
Yes, right.
right now.
Yes.
Okay. And without having it be, which is a good point, have it an equation set in stone.
But I'm still
And-
wondering
I mean,
why
in
we
19
bring that to town meeting.
In 1978, I gather the FinCom voted that budgets would not increase more than 50% of the CPI.
Really?
You know, this committee. And the inflation rate that year was 10%. So basically, they were saying, so they were saying they're limiting it to half the inflation rate. Whereas, look at the record, our budgets have been twice the inflation rate for, I mean, that's the Randall curve, right?
So
And that's the point of the curve that
is to
expands,
start this
is
process of focusing
the
attention
Randall curve,
of the town
right?
on this issue.
Would-
Raising the level of
To highlight the
awareness.
fact that there has been no long-range planning to date. And this will be the beginning of that. And it will the discussion will focus attention on this, and critics may say, well, we take issue with your number, fine. You know, come to our meetings when we're discussing it and present your number. We'll hash it out. It might change every single year, but the important thing is to be focusing our attention on this issue and to be planning ahead.
So help me think this through. So how would this change our behavior next year? What will we actually
I
do?
think the concern is not so much next year, when Thomas, when we, but 5 years.
Okay, okay.
Well,
So-
the change in the behavior next year would mean, as the, potential leader of this gnarly
Yes,
band
fine.
here,
Yes.
is we would need to set up a cycle, as we do with the guideline process, to get through a schedule where we arrive at something. And we would need to set up a schedule where we have it's on the agenda for n number of meetings, and then we take a vote and say, June, or the end of the fiscal year, we say, this is the number, and now we finish that piece of our work. We finish that piece of our work so that then in the fall, we can go on to the guidelines process. But that piece has to be put on the shelf by sometime late summer, where we're done. We've calculated it, that's what it is, and now we can sort of look at it as a guidepost as we're going through the guidelines process. So it will become part of our annual, it's part of our annual growth rate exercise, we'll call it. And I do think that the 5-year tax projection might be feathered together in terms of presentation purposes with it. In other words, our number might be like, hey, here's what we think the taxes look like, and here's what we want the taxes to look like.
And that was the point of my question earlier about that chart was and how the overrides figure into that process.
Yeah, so there may be some interplay there, but right now we do not have enough focus on the 5-year plan. The 5-year tax projection that we currently make is a 10-minute exercise. We probably need to stretch that out so we're not like looking at a piece of paper and that minute saying, oh yeah, I'm 3%. We have to find a more rigorous process for that as well. So,
Okay, so back to, someone else raised an interesting question, which is, there was a lot of confusion on behalf of the public out there, and I've talked to people separately, and none of them understand why we need to do this. So it does raise the point of, this might not pass, and if it doesn't pass, then what?
Would be embarrassed.
It would
be embarrassing.
We have to consider the political risks. I don't know how else to phrase it.
It would affect our authority.
Yes.
What little authority we have.
Don't say that.
Maybe that's a good thing.
yeah, exactly.
Credibility.
Everyone?
In communication, being able to communicate that what we're doing is not, we're not making laws. We're making recommendations, and the reasons behind making those recommendations has to be communicated in a non-threatening way, but clear when making the presentation, so people don't get all up in arms and feel we're changing the laws, and we're going to sit here and we're going to say, this is what the tax rate's going to be. We don't have that authority. And a lot of people don't understand that the Finance Committee does not have that authority.
More specifically, they're just confused, they don't understand
Right.
the reason for this.
Exactly. I don't think this is.
And I had a hard time explaining to them in a way that seemed to make an impression on them. Because at the end they would say, well, okay, that's good, but why do you need a motion on the town warrant to do that? You can do that anyway.
Just to raise the level of awareness.
Well, we sort of wanted to hear from them, right?
Well, we couldn't- we
think it's a
couldn't-
problem, do you?
Yes.
Right?
We couldn't make a presentation at town meeting if we didn't have it on the warrant. So I think people have done this before, that the article is withdrawn, but they still make a presentation, I think of, I don't know, one of the B things or something like that. But they have withdrawn the article, but they still speak.
moderator allows them to make a presentation.
Now, Tom could make a presentation the first time he gets up to say whatever the FinCom recommendations are. So if for the first time the FinCom recommendations come up is the town budget, Tom could get up and say, yes, we support affirmative action, but I have some remarks. And one of them is that we have calculated sustainable growth rate, and we're hoping that this will become a tradition. So he can make those remarks as part of his support for the town budget or whatever other budget you
Well,
want.
see, okay, you can see your remarks might be more than, I don't know, whether
No, he'd be going,
Carmen would,
she would have to say, oh, you can only talk about the town budget as a sustainable growth rate. I think if Tom said this applies to all budgets, Carmen would say, let it
For
go.
all three of the operating budgets.
No, she's not gonna make him do it, right? So I think he could just do it.
So are you saying we do that instead of this? Or-
Well,
or in addition to this, or-
these are giving me pause. I think Dick's point about the politics of it is very cogent. It's, there's a good chance this won't pass.
Right.
It's gonna be a bunch of ornery people.
Yes.
We've already had some controversy. No, this is gonna come up, and we're gonna get all these questions, and, it's just enough that if there's confusion, it might not pass.
well, so we withdraw, but we still have the slot, which we could make a presentation. I've seen that done
Why
before.
Carmen would object to
Yeah.
a presentation like that.
So,
Tom, did Carmen have feedback to you after the hearing at all? She was there. No? Okay.
So the presentation would be why, justification for why FinCom feels we need to establish a sustainable growth rate, because we look at the 5-year projection and we see overrides on the horizon, or, I don't know, fill in the blanks. So that's the suggestion, is it, that we make that presentation?
Yeah,
All the-
and show the.
Because people
curves.
ask, why do you need this?
So
So
this
that's
is-
the question that we're going to answer.
Are we talking about this in lieu of the article, or?
Yes.
I don't know what we're talking about anymore. It's 10:20.
Yeah. Are you-
Okay, it's a good point. I move that we table this one to discuss among ourselves and with other people in light of this and decide next week whether we want to even move an article.
I'd like to make one comment in support of the chair, who I think is a very persuasive public speaker.
Well, I wasn't at the public hearing when I discussed this.
You did pretty well, Rod. I think you
Okay.
can handle it.
That was a tough one.
The town meeting was faced with a proposal for affordable housing funding in the prior year that Tom very eloquently maneuvered into a committee, and now we have 4 articles on affordable housing funding. And that was because Tom came up and said, why don't we put this aside, form a committee, we'll come back with some other proposals for how to fund this, and we move the town meeting forward. Tom can be very persuasive, and that amendment passed, if I recall. I could be wrong.
If you did,
You should hold that against me.
I'm not holding it against you. I'm saying Tom can be very persuasive. So
Sounded that way.
in front of that crowd. So I do think that he would be able to, workshop it enough that he can.
Well,
This isn't a
that-
referendum on
that,
terms of-
we had a couple of people speak in opposition to it at the public hearing. However, I presented again at the League of Women Voters town meeting preview.
And you were very persuasive in that presentation.
And
Yeah.
the consensus in the room was that this was something that ought to be done. And there were, 50 people there, I would say.
These are hardcore people who come to town meetings.
Exactly.
And they're engaged,
Right.
they're engaged people.
So,
So the question has become, what or how do we present this
Yes.
at town meeting? Do we actually move it forward as a warrant article to be voted up or down, or do we just make a presentation? Is that correct?
I don't think we're going to get to make a presentation unless it's an article.
Could we withdraw the article at the last minute and still make a presentation?
No.
No, but why, you could
Yes, you
do what I'm suggesting, which is make a
Make a presentation and then withdraw it.
Right.
You could make the presentation in support of Article 8.
We're not trying to game the.
Or recommend no action.
I'd like to get out of here. So I think Phil has a motion that we table this until our next meeting.
Let's just talk it over and reflect on it.
Isn't that against open meeting law?
Well, not amongst ourselves.
No, we're moving to table it. You're right, we can't,
Discussing it.
well, I think we can discuss it individually, but we can't secretly discuss it.
To ourselves?
Like, I can talk to Tom, you can talk to Tom separately, John and I can talk among ourselves.
Five people
No?
Cereal, it's called cereal.
I think we did that already. So there's no sense in deferring if we're going to.
The open meeting law doesn't mean we can't talk to each other about issues outside of the meeting.
Yes, it does.
No, we can't meet.
You can't have a
You can't
quorum.
talk, you can't deliberate.
You can't have
Right.
serial discussion.
Serial discussions, yeah, can't have that.
Right, I'm not saying it's serial discussions, I'm saying that just, talk like you would, like, I'm gonna go home and talk to my wife. Am I allowed to do that under the open meeting law?
I don't know.
Yes.
Do you talk? Yes, the answer is yes, but I don't know if we're allowed to talk amongst ourselves.
Was there a second?
What is the motion?
The motion?
The motion is that we
Table.
Article 18 until our next meeting. Second? Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Mary, you can stay here and talk amongst yourselves. So, listen, it being 10:25, I think we ought to table the rest of these until our next meeting.
Affordable housing.
So moved.
Right, okay. So, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Right, all in favor, please leave.